All right, folks, get ready to hear from one of my creative friends and see what they've got going on in their world and all along those lines and everything. And of course, we did a pre record earlier, so we may be sharing some of that with you as well. And of course, that dealt with parenting, sexuality, and a number of other things. So definitely looking forward to y'all hearing part of that conversation as well. But until we hear from one of the other guests who is out of the creative field, they should be appearing very shortly and everything. I think that they're scheduled to be here around 4:30, which is going to bring you some news items that you may be interested in as well. So the Fed is delivering a jumbo 0.75% rate rise. That's right. They're saying there's going to be a rate rise and all of that. So a lot of people are paying attention to their personal economy as well as the economy of the country. So the Federal Reserve hiked interest rates by a supersized 0.75 percentage point on Wednesday. That would be today the biggest increase since 1994, and said it may do so again in July in a bid to bring inflation to its heels. Consumer prices have crested to the highest level in 40 years, reaching an annual 8.6% in May. The central bank's benchmark federal funds rate now stands at a range between 1.5% and 1.75%, and the Fed says rates could hit 3.54% by the end of the year, the highest since 2008, and 3.8 by the end of 23. The Fed expects economic growth to slow to 1.7% this year as borrowing becomes more expensive, and for unemployment to reach 3.7 by the end of this year and 4.1 through 2024. So that's some of the things that we are seeing going on in terms of economics and all along those lines. So definitely, folks are going to be paying attention and seeing if this is going to slow down things or what's going to happen in that sense. As a matter of fact, Ryan Patel, a global business executive, says that a few highlights that he saw provided by the Fed were that increased interest by 0.75%, economic growth expected to slow by 1.7% this year, and unemployment will reach 3.7% by the end of the year, rising to 4.1% by 2024. So that's actually not bad unemployment kind of figures and all of that. In May, consumer prices rose 8.6% year on year, the highest level in 40 years. And definitely that is some of the things that people are paying attention to. Of course, you know, it is the summertime, so folks are looking at retail as well. So definitely some retail concerns are out there also, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the retail space. Retail sales fell for the first time this year as Americans reduced spending on big ticket items in the face of rising consumer prices. The value of purchases dropped 0.3% in May, led by vehicle sales that have been dented by higher prices and borrowing costs, and the still rising cost of gasoline. The Commerce Department report points to a softening in demand for merchandise as inflation notched its highest level last month in 40 years. The Federal Reserve Wednesday raised interest rates to 0.75 percentage point, the biggest increase since 1994, in a bid to counter price increases. So definitely does sound like there might be some interesting news in the retail space. Thomas Kevin Swift, a senior executive for Global Chemicals ICIS, said a disappointing report with May retail sales falling 0.4% to 587.9 billion, a level up 6.9% year to year. Considering inflation, retail volumes likely fell 1.4% in May. Some of the weaknesses was known, example motor vehicles, but furniture and home furnishing stores and electronic stores also fell. The latter two segments serve as a good leading indicator of the broader business cycle as their big ticket items are sensitive to changes in underlying economic fundamentals. Sales at health and personal care stores, miscellaneous store retailers, and non store retailers also declined. Gains elsewhere were likely buoyed by higher prices, example gasoline stations, and retail sales volumes. Ex- Items excluding inflation were likely off 1.6% year to year. Inflation is eroding consumer purchasing power and confidence and is manifesting itself in consumer spending. Sales at food services and drinking places gained, reflecting the shift from goods to services. This is good for consumer and institutional uses for plastic. So definitely that is something that we are hearing in the sense of what's going on with the economy and all along those lines. I wonder how you're doing with your economy and if you're feeling comfortable with your own personal economy and all along those lines. By the way, the brokerage firms, Redfin and Compass, have announced layoffs. I know some people that are in the brokerage and the financial fields. I wonder what they're thinking about these particular kinds of news. But the moves come amid rising mortgage rates and a national housing slowdown, CNBC reports. Redfin, which just the other weeks announced it would be rescinding job offers to cut costs, announced on Tuesday it is cutting 8% of its workforce. We don't have enough work for our agents and support staff, its CEO Glenn Kilman said. Compass announced it's letting 10% of staffers go due to the clear signal of a slowing economic growth, according to a Compass spokesperson. So Jasmine Singh, who unfortunately was one of those people that was recently laid off, said, "Today I was one of the 8% of folks impacted by the Redfin layoff. What I'm most sad about is the amazing culture and support I've received at Redfin. I would not be the person I am today had it not been for my 4+ years there. I cannot understand score how amazing the people who work at Redfin are. They are humble, kind, and incredibly hardworking. Not being able to work day in and day out with them will be the hardest part. I know this was an incredibly tough decision by Glenn Kelman to make, and he handled it with humanity and grace. We're in a tough economy, and he has many people to support." So they were saying that they're going to personally update their resume and all along those lines. And so definitely we are seeing that some folks are getting laid off and all along those lines. As a matter of fact, senior IT business systems analyst at Zendesk says, "I'm saddened to read about the mass layoffs reported today at Compass, my former employer. When your coworkers are skilled, bright, caring, and relentless about results as you are, you can imagine my grief knowing some of these talented folks are now out of a job when the market seems to be tightening." So he was asking people to not hesitate to reach out and help those people that might be in those networks and all along those lines. By the way, it looks like YouTube is coming for TikTok's ground. And we know a lot of those young people love TikTok, but it looks like YouTube wants to do something about that as well. So we do see that YouTube is going to be going into the short form video space and everything. So watch out, TikTok. A new short form video giant is on the rise. Google revealed Wednesday that its 2-year-old YouTube Shorts platform has more than 1.5 billion logged in users a month. That number shows just how fast Shorts is gaining on TikTok, which is forecast to hit the 1.5 billion month user figure sometime this year, according to TechCrunch. Google has promoted Shorts, which can be up to 60 seconds long, as a way to drive viewers to creators' long form videos on YouTube, suggesting it still sees longer videos as producing more value. And Zach Ferraro says YouTube announced it now has 1.5 billion monthly viewers of short form content, which is more than all of TikTok users last quarter. There's no doubt that TikTok has grown incredibly fast, and because it has rapidly changed the habit of online video consumption, it's easy to forget that YouTube is still the king. And this particular gentleman says, "I personally think YouTube still has to solve a seamless cohabitation of short form and long form content on channels, so more established YouTubers are comfortable diving into the format. But if they do, the opportunity is there to win across all video." This chat just emphasized the dominance that YouTube still has on the video space, despite not having the same growth trajectory or hype. So it'll be interesting to see how YouTube does with the short form and all along those lines. I know most of our stuff is long form, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with the short form in that sense. Jim Louderbach, who is an author of Inside the Creator Economy, which is a weekly newsletter, says, "In the early day of online video, 2003 to 2009, there were 20 or 30 important video platforms: Rever, Break, Blip, Veo, Vidler, etc., etc. YouTube beat them all. For a big part of the last decade, Big Red was the only game in town. But in 2015, Facebook pivoted to video. Musically went from preteen girls lip singing to today's TikTok, and Snap incorporated Ad Discover. Twitch built a huge streaming business. Sure, TikTok's rise has been amazing. Double T truly democratized video creation with tools including reactions, duets, Stitch, green screen, and more that made it easy for almost anyone to create. But Shorts and Reels borrowed many of TikTok's innovations as they built their competitors. For a while, innovation was only one way, and no feature copying is not innovation. But now we've got at least six significant platforms vying for creators. Feature copying is now going both ways. TikTok, for example, is adding tipping and subs like Twitch, and its parent company, ByteDance, is delving deeper into the metaverse. This fierce competition is leading to unprecedented innovation everywhere. I love that TikTok has grown so big so quickly, it has single handedly pushed every platform to innovate, to be better, and to do more for creators and fans. So let a thousand features bloom, because when platforms battle, you win. Bring it on. So it looks like we might be getting some new features and all of that because of these things in that sense. And Phil Ranta, a chief executive officer at Wormhole Labs, says that another worst kept secret in digital content, TikTok's biggest competitor is YouTube, hands down. Remember last year when people you've never heard of became the number one YouTube channels by monthly views? Remember when Topper Gill was the top creator in the world? That was YouTube Shorts when there was more consumption than creation, exactly what creators are looking for. The hardest part of being a TikTok celebrity is monetization. The brand deals are comparatively small. Passive monetization is nearly non existent. It's a grind. Most TikTok stars have to grow their audience on TikTok, then move their audiences to other platforms that monetize better: Instagram, Patreon, OnlyFans, and yes, YouTube. But moving audiences to other platforms is hard, and it means you, the creator, have to maintain that platform. That means more content, more community management, less time for TikTok. If YouTube Shorts can take the lead by moving faster on monetization, creators will take notice and start to trickle over. They're already providing the audience and reach side. Then they have to earn the brand heat, so it becomes a default viewership platform for the hordes of Gen Z fans that are TikTok addicts. That's the hardest part. With a number like 1.5 billion monthly users, TikTokers who wrote off YouTube should be giving it another look. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in that space and who some of these other people are going to be jumping into the game as well. And we do know that the metaverse is part of that game also. By the way, Caterpillar, I think that would be Caterpillar the Tractors, is setting up a camp in Texas. That's right. Construction equipment manufacturer Caterpillar said it was moving its global headquarters to Texas from Illinois. Caterpillar, which will still employ 17,000 people in Illinois, follows the likes of Tesla and Hewlett Packard in relocating to the Southwest for favorable tax policies and growth opportunities. States such as Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, Oklahoma, and Arizona grew manufacturing jobs by 100,000 between 2017 and 2020, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, demonstrating the expanding available workforce in the region, a big draw for growing companies. So that's something that we're going to see is that some of these companies are going to be moving toward the Southwest, and part of that is because of those lovely lower taxes and all in that sense. As a matter of fact, Larry Case, an investment research analyst, says perhaps a fitting, albeit cynical, perspective applies. CAT moved executive headquarters from Peoria several years ago. Few manufacturing changes occurred. The same appears the case this time, at least in view of reports in today's Chicago Tribune. The more mobile administrative and executive operations are moving, particularly among the highly compensated constituency. Much of the legacy leadership is gone, with the Illinois ties fading along the way. Personal income tax is lower in Texas. Highly compensated folks are not terribly concerned about the other taxes, fees, and utility costs, which impact the rank and file much more than the upper management tiers. Further, urban is much closer to Mexico, where much U.S. manufacturing is performed. Throw in a few Longhorn economic development gifts, and the decision was easy. Taxation is largely cited as the catalyst for these moves. Ironically, Texas is not all that low when considered on an all in basis, as it affects most people. No big bargains in housing, and property taxes often exceeded most in the Chicago land region. So that's just some of the news that we're hearing about and that folks may be interested in. Tell us some of the things that you are paying attention to and that you are concerned about as well. So definitely that's just some of the things that I'm seeing, and we're waiting for our creative person to come in and share their story as well. So definitely should be hearing from Sasha Dalton in the not too distant future. I did send them the link, and hopefully they'll be appearing and sharing what they are all about and all along those lines. By the way, I mentioned the housing market earlier. Let's see some other stories in the housing market. There is a record high for home equity. That's right, home equity in the U.S. hit a record high during the first quarter of 2022 to 27.8 trillion, with the amount of tappable equity, the amount homeowners can borrow while maintaining 20% ownership of their property, hitting $11 trillion. The hot housing market has seen house prices rise 20% year on year. This may not be great news for those looking to purchase property, but for homeowners, it's offering myriad options, including providing home equity credit lines for those looking to boost their bank balances. So Douglas Jones, a personal banking person, was saying, "Don't be fooled by the marketers. A personal residence and its equity is not an investment; it's an expense. There is the cost of borrowing, maintenance and upkeep, taxes, insurance, bug prevention, etc." So definitely, those are the things you've got to face if you buy a house and all along those lines. By the way, in the sports news, I saw that Serena has served up a surprise. Serena Williams, tennis's GOAT, the greatest of all time, will be back on the lawn at Wimbledon this month for her first action since she was injured in the tournament's first round last year. Williams, who has a record 23 Grand Slam championships in the Open era, including 7 Wimbledon trophies, was awarded a wild card entry for the women's singles competition, which begins June 27th. The 40-year-old American's surprise return to elite competition will begin with a women's double game with Ons Jabeur on grass at Eastbourne, England. Steffi Graf, who is retired, is tied for second with men's player Rafael Nadal with 22 Grand Slam titles. So Andre Wang, a financial advisor, says Wimbledon just got better with 40-year-old Serena ready to play. She recently raised a $111 million early stage venture fund to invest in founders with diverse points of view. So that was just a little side note that Andrew was given. Serena's stats: match win percentage on grass 88.4%, 107 wins, 14 losses. Clay 82.4%, 178 wins, 38 losses. Hard court 85.5%, 530 wins, 90 losses. 8 titles on grass, 7 times Wimbledon, and 2012 Olympic gold medals. In 2022 grass court tournaments in her career, she's reached the finals 12 times. And how far do you think she can go? I personally think she can make it. I think she might even be able to win it and all of that. And like we were talking about in one of our early news stories and all, looks like Internet Explorer has gone. They've got Microsoft Edge and some other products that are seen as being better. So if you're an Explorer fan, sorry, today spells the end to the well-established internet browser as Microsoft finally pulled the plug after announcing plans to do so last year. The first version of Internet Explorer was launched in 1995. So we're talking, this is 22, we're talking 27 years ago. And while many remain diehard fans, LinkedIn parent company Microsoft has steadily been encouraging users onto its 2015 launched Edge browser, but not everyone is ready to go. I'm still trying to process it, one user told the Wall Street Journal. Edge users will still be able to browse in IE mode until 2029, with Microsoft saying the mode would allow people to view sites only compatible with Explorer. So definitely that is some news about the Internet Explorer and it's disappearing and all of that. So that's just some of the things that we're hearing in that space and all along those lines. By the way, the battle in the Ukraine is definitely reaching, at least on the east side, a critical point. So if you want to know some of what's going on, the battle for Severodonsky appears to be entering its final stages, according to the New York Times, after the last bridge linking the eastern city to the rest of Ukraine was destroyed. NATO ministers will meet Wednesday for a 2-day summit as the war enters a fourth month. Russian forces now control at least 80% of the surrounding Donbas region, Ukraine's industrial heartland, and Ukraine has again pleaded for more weapons, saying it has received only 10% of the military assistance it requested from Western allies. The Ukrainian military said it was making gains in the south, pushing back Russian troops and advancing to within 12 miles of the occupied city of Kherson. So that's just some of the news that we're hearing in that space and all along that kind of idea in what's happening in the war for right now. Like I said, it's been going on for a while, and it looks like a lot of folks are saying that it could be going on for much longer. Tesla employees have taken to LinkedIn to discuss being laid off, something CEO Elon Musk said would happen on June 3rd to 10% of salaried workers because he had a super bad feeling about the economy. Among the cuts was senior executive Christopher Basagas, who was hired as the company's Singapore county manager just a year ago. Business Insider reports others affected included a project lead, a CGI animation lead, and a regional warehouse manager. Tesla employed 92,290 people globally by the end of 2021. Musk warned employees in an internal memo this week, "This has been a very tough quarter, so we really need to rally hard to recover." And Mike Derlin said being part of the Tesla layoff was hard news to receive. The uncertainty of unemployment can be difficult to bear, but the skills and experience I was able to obtain in my time with the company gave me confidence I need to maintain a positive outlook for the future of my career. I truly believe renewable energy is the future we need and hope to play a role in reaching that goal. So that's what they were saying. And Lindsay Miller, a PhD, added a little over a year and a half ago, I was offered an opportunity with Tesla. Never in a million years would I have guessed that I'd work in a tech, automotive, or sustainability industry. In a year and a half, I learned more than I ever could have imagined, met so many amazing people, and had the opportunity to contribute to accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy. This is something I wouldn't change for the world. Unfortunately, I'm among the 10% of the Tesla employees affected by the recent job reduction. I'm extremely grateful for my time at Giga Texas and excited for my next chapter and all along those lines. So definitely we're hearing even on LinkedIn some of the words from some of those that were dropped from that particular company and that are trying to find new homes and all along those lines. And so that's just some of the news that I found. I'm going to bring a couple of ad spots to you, including one about Prosperity Financial Services and others. And then hopefully when we come back, we'll either run the interview we did earlier today with the young lady that is involved in the space of child raising and definitely being an unshameless parent, as well as some stuff that she did in the space of sex education. Or maybe Sasha would have made it in and we can continue the conversation I was hoping to have with that particular creative person. But we'll find out after these particular announcements.
Are you looking for money-saving strategies for your business and personal finances? Are you tired of working hard every day with little or nothing to show for it? Contact Prosperity Financial Services, LLC right now for your free financial consultation. Call now to reserve yours today, 804-349-8600, 804-349-8600.
The difference between thinking and doing and living in the 21st century. They teach us about being a real quarterback-oriented games. We don't have to just use video games and live in the shadows of good things because of them. We grow up with agility far larger and bigger than we are tall. Parents are the champions and have to be our first life coaches and know-it-alls. Who knows how this came to be? Coaches will ask you if you know your right foot from your left, if you know yourself, if you act knowingly good or bad, if you can move and negotiate a field with style and form, if you can tackle or throw a pass, or if your last name is that of a clown. If you can let someone know on the team that you are in trouble before you cause yourself or someone else trouble. If you are ready to learn teamwork or aware that you started out today with your pants down or your sportsmanship was left on the kitchen table, if you know the social studies, the alphabets, science, music, characters, and the stats and the numbers of a great student player eligible to stay on the team, and if you know the poise of great athletic champions and their scientific attitudes that are historical or music to us now, if you have the swag of the game, the discipline, the performance, and artistic form down pat, and if you have the style of gymnastics that the sport has with life, if you have the work ethic and determination to make it all seem easy and not a game at all, if you have the knowledge of all the above, or you don't know things like this even make the difference. I think that when it comes to the importance of parents and their field and self-knowledge, wisdom, virtues, and courage, their teachings, love, respect, care that they illustrate on the field and in the grind of life with their actions and their ideas, experiences, muscle, and strategic magic and skills wrapped around us with their priceless love. For their verbs to be that make us winners in this hard and fast third century that without them, kids and adults, athletes could hardly see or do anything at all. Parents teach us the difference between playing video games and playing on the field. Parents teach us how to be champions. A huge hug should go to parents, coaches, and parent-like community people who have love on the field for you and who are champions for your life, both in and out the games.
It's time for you to start bossing in social media. For all your social media needs, you've come to the right place at the right time to get your website designed, landing page, social media platforms, and get the training you need to get in front of the people that's ready to buy your products and services. Let me train you with StreamYard, Zoom, Clubhouse, and much more. And let me help you get your virtual professionals, not assistants, because assistants can only assist you, but the virtual professionals can give you that professional flavor that you need to expand your reach and increase your revenue. Jump on in and get in where you fit in and start boxing today.
As I was saying, we're going to bring up the interview that we did earlier with Miss Tina. And like I said, if Sasha comes by, we'll interrupt that interview and we'll save that for a later time. As I was saying, we're going to bring up the interview that we did right earlier with Miss Tina. Fascinating and conversation. Like I said, if Sasha comes by, we'll interrupt that interview and we'll save that for bring up the interview that we did right earlier with Miss Tina. Fascinating and conversation. Like I said, if Sasha comes by, we'll interrupt that interview and we'll save that for bring up the interview that we did right earlier with Miss Tina. Fascinating and like I said, if Sasha comes by, we'll interrupt that interview and we'll save that for bring up the interview that we did right earlier with Miss Tina. Fascinating and like I said, if Sasha comes by, we'll interrupt that interview. All right, folks, get ready to hear from one of my creative friends and see what they've got going on in their world and all along those lines and everything. Of course, we did a pre-record earlier, so we may be sharing some of that with you as well. And of course, that dealt with parenting, sexuality, and a number of other things. So definitely looking forward to y'all hearing part of that conversation as well. But until we hear from one of the other guests who is out of the creative field, they should be appearing very shortly and everything. I think that they're scheduled to be here around 4:30, which is going to bring you some news items that you may be interested in as well. So the Fed is delivering a jumbo 0.75% rate rise. That's right. They're saying there's going to be a rate rise. Okay, that was a slight technical error and everything because that's not the one that I wanted to bring you. I wanted to bring you the interview with Dr. Tina. So we're going to see if we can't find that one and make a correction. But that's what you do if there are slight errors and all along those lines. And like I said, we'll be waiting to hear from Miss Sasha as well and seeing what they've got going on in the book space. I know that I've heard from Ralph and hearing what's going on in that space and all along those lines and everything in that sense and everything that's going on in that way. So right now we're going to bring it back up and hopefully this is the right one and we'll see if this goes on without a hitch and we get to that interview that we want and all along those lines. So y'all hold on one second. We're going to try to bring the correct one on and all of that. And definitely looking forward to that and going to find it for you very shortly. So if you hold on one second, we'll try to get to that interview that was done earlier today and share that with you as well. So definitely always glad to have great conversations, amazing interviews, and all along those lines. So if y'all just be patient, we're going to bring it up. The interview that we did with Miss Tina that talked about parenting, talked about sexuality, and talked about a number of other issues as well. So here, bring that up onto to the screen and bring that to you as we speak. So let's go for it. I don't know how it is for the rest of y'all in the world, but in Durham, North Carolina, it is hot. And as I was just talking to a new friend, a new acquaintance about, I am looking forward to the Festival de Eno, which will be in about 2.5 weeks. And actually, this week, there'll be some Juneteenth activities. I believe they'll be all weekend long and all of that. But I'm not actually emceeing any of the Juneteenth activities, even though I may be going there and probably get pulled into work in one form or fashion or another. But definitely, I'll be working the Eno in 2 weeks from this weekend. And they're talking about 99 this weekend during Juneteenth. And I'm sure it'll be something comparable, if not worse, when we get around to the 4th of July weekend, which, like I said, is in 2 weeks, or as I like to just call it. And I jokingly tell the founders of that particular festival, well, maybe not so much the founders, but definitely some of those that have been involved for decades and everything, they think that it's to celebrate the 4th of July and the nation's Independence Day and all along those lines. And they think that it's to celebrate the state park because it is at a state park, the Eno River Park, that is very much a lovely park for hiking and doing other things. I even know some people that have gone kayaking and done other things at that park and have really enjoyed themselves there. But while they're celebrating that, gathering new land, making sure that the land is protected, that is there, and all of that, it's always around the week of my birthday. So, as I've been jokingly saying for about 20 years, it's really just one big birthday celebration for me. So, in case folks didn't know, it's just one big birthday celebration for me. Tens of thousands, if not 100,000 of people coming there to celebrate my birthday. And that's like the running joke. I usually will make it from the stage. And usually some of my friends will come by, give me birthday wishes, and also let me know that they do know that it's really just one big birthday party for yours truly. So that's one of the things that I jokingly tell them and that they enjoy having. It's one of my little routine sayings and all along those lines. And so that's some of the things that are going on, namely the heat. And of course, people are paying attention to what is happening there as Russia continues to invade Ukraine. And of course, people here are worrying about just day to day survival. It does seem like we've moved away from the pandemic into an endemic, but definitely I'm still seeing folks wearing their masks. And of course, folks are still out there getting vaccinated, and that is a good thing. But now people are concerned about gas prices and about food prices and a number of other things in that category. I've even heard some people wondering if we're heading into a recession or not heading into a recession or not. And even some people even using that dreaded D word, depression, which hopefully we're not heading into that at all. But who knows? Only time will tell. And of course, we've got the political things that are going on because there have been political races. I know there were some in Tuesday in Nevada, South Carolina, and in other parts of the country as well. And of course, we've got people paying attention to even road building going on in places like Africa, places like some of the Latin American countries, as well as other things in that space. And of course, people are paying attention to the environment. And then, of course, I heard that they made a ruling, a judgment, which seems to me didn't need to really be that much of a ruling or judgment because it just seems like pure logic. But that's just me and everything. But I did see that they ruled that Happy the elephant is just an elephant, because apparently some of the animal rights activists were trying to say that Happy needed to have the same rights as people. So there was definitely a whole people argument around whether that particular elephant had some of the same cognitive abilities as people and all along those lines. And I had actually read recently where a gentleman in the computer field was actually arguing that his computer was also a cognizant being and all along those lines. And I don't think that folks were quite buying his argument either and all along that kind of conversation. But it'll be interesting to see what people have to say about that and everything. But I've had the pleasure of having some tremendous guests that I have found through Podcast Guest, which is a great service that lets you find amazing people and all of that. And definitely through Clubhouse and a number of other sources that are out there, in addition to my own source of friends and family and all along those lines. And as many folks know, I love entrepreneurs, I love creatives, and I love activists of all sorts and all of that. And when I heard about Tina and what she was all about, I was like, hey, wait a minute. This is somebody that has some views that are similar to mine about parenting. Even though I'm not a parent, I'm just a uncle and all of that. An uncle of my two nephews. But then I do have a lot of children that have come from the whole relationships of friends of mine and things of that nature. So I guess I'm like their play uncle as well. So I have my two natural kids that I take, well, I won't say I take care of, but that I try to keep in touch with and try to make sure that they are doing well and all of that, that being my nephews, Julius and Langston, but also a whole host, and I do mean a host of kids that I have seen grow up during the course of their life. And while I may not be a parent, I do consider myself to be a caregiver and all along those lines. So I'll bring Tina up. We're going to have a conversation about shameless parenting. And I guess I would just be shameless in the sense of being a shameless uncle and all along those lines. And all this definitely is fun going to their soccer matches on occasion and just seeing them out and about. Matter of fact, one of the last times I saw them, they had just gotten the Oculus glasses. So it was interesting watching them stumble around the house while they were playing whatever game they were playing and things along those lines. And I know sometimes it's just games like Roadblocks that some of my nephews enjoy and things along that kind of avenue. But tell us a little bit about yourself, Tina Sellers, and how you came about finding out about this whole notion of shameless parenting and all of that, because I know a lot of people, when they think of parenting has its ups and downs. As a matter of fact, I was talking to a friend of mine not that long ago that was a little bit frustrated with his kids because the kids had started to distance themselves from him and things of that nature. And as part of that could have been that he's a divorcee, so the relationship wasn't all that great and all of that between he and the ex and all along those lines. And now they are kind of distancing themselves from him. And I've even heard of, in radical cases, kids literally divorcing themselves from parents and all of that. So I was just wondering how this all came about, this notion of shameless parenting.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Mark. I'm so glad to be here talking with you today. So, just a little bit about my background. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified sex therapist and certified sex therapy supervisor. And I taught at a university in a marriage and family therapy program for about 28 years.
Right.
And so marriage and family therapy, medical family therapy are all areas of mine. But during that time, I also taught the graduate level human sexuality class
Mhm.
for all of the people that were becoming therapists. We had one class around sexuality, which isn't enough, but I can talk about that later. But
Right.
I started teaching that in the early 90s. And I would have my students write their sexual autobiography as one of their assignments. And a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine doing that. But when you're training to become a therapist, you want to be very clear what your stories are,
Mhm.
where you begin and end, so that you're clear about where your clients begin and end. And in the United States, we haven't had comprehensive sex education really ever. But
Wow.
prior to 1980, we had a little bit more sex education and sex research occurring in the United
Mhm.
States. Beginning in 1980, we started the abstinence only
Mhm.
education program, which really wasn't providing education. It was just telling kids not to do something and telling
Right.
kids how dangerous things were. And we know now from studying it that it was 80% medically inaccurate. So
Wow.
even today, we only have 18 states that require whatever sex education they do provide to be medically accurate.
Mm.
Only 18. And so, really, when you think about the last 40 plus years, the vast majority of people haven't gotten solid sexual health information or relationship health information. And instead, what they've gotten is they've learned about sexuality from the media or from their friends.
Mhm.
And so what I noticed as I was reading these sexual autobiographies was right around the year 2000 or so, as students were talking about, because I'd given them many, many questions, and I said, you don't have to answer every one of these questions, but look at the arc of what I'm asking you to
Right.
reflect on, like your family of origin and your childhood and your
Mhm.
adolescence and your young adulthood. And what I started to notice is that people were describing themselves in terms of like humiliation and disgust about themselves, and not at all understanding the development that they had been through. So a lot of naivete around
Mhm.
how typical it was to feel this whatever thing at this age or this age or this age. They just didn't know that that was normal, and so they would describe themselves as perverted. So for
Mm.
example, they would be early adolescent and they would be masturbating because they had all these hormones going on in their body, but they would feel so badly about themselves.
Right.
Just like, I must be perverted. There must be something wrong with me. I should be able to not do this. And then as some of them would get in relationships, they would feel really badly about that. And I thought, what am I seeing? Like, I don't understand why there's been this dramatic shift. And it took me about 3 years to realize I was hitting the first wave of students. So these are people in their mid 20s
Mhm.
or so that had hit their adolescence, a good 10 or 15 years before that.
Right.
So around 85, 90, when abstinence only was really beginning to hit a critical point in the United
Mhm.
States, where we had many, many, many schools that's all that they offered. And many, many parents who were hearing lots of danger messages around sexuality. You have to remember AIDS hit the East
Right.
Coast in the early 80s, the West Coast in the mid 80s. And so there was just so much fear. And that fear had really been pumped into our socio-political system across
Mhm.
the United States. So the religious right and the moral majority was really growing. That was becoming part of the political movement in the United States. It wasn't a separation of church and state as we had seen before. Those things had
Right.
really begun to join together. And so there was just this increasing sexual shame that people were carrying in their bodies and in their minds about who they were. And yet, what they were learning about sexuality, they were getting from media, which beginning in the mid 80s, we really, in the United States, we dropped most of our Federal Communication Commission regulations on what could be shown on TV or in music videos. We began at that point to have video games, and then shortly thereafter we had the internet. And so this is really where people were going to get their education about sexuality, about the value of women or not. There was much more sort of violence against women that started in the mid 80s. And so it was really affecting what I noticed in my students and my clients. And so I just became really curious about, what are we doing to cultivate a sense of sexual health in our country, rather than a sense that something must be horribly wrong with me and I must be bad. And yet I'm learning about sexuality in a way that's really based in fantasy. It's not really based in reality, right? And so I just started to do a lot of asking of my students questions. And I began to find those that were primarily affected just by abstinence education and shame in their homes growing up. And then I found a whole nother host of people that simultaneously were also involved in conservative churches, that then were having experiences in their youth group of being told, don't have sex before marriage, don't think about sexuality, if you feel anything sexual towards somebody, you ought to be able to stop that. And they were getting these messages that actually really aren't humanly possible for the vast majority of people.
Well, that's what you were bringing up all kinds of interesting questions I've got to ask you about based on my own experiences and things that I've dealt with and everything. One is, you called it a sexual autobiography, so I'm imagining that they are to write about their journey in sexuality, like when their first time was and things of that nature, and maybe even share some of the experiences without, naming names because you want to protect the innocent or the not innocent, as the case may be, and everything along those lines. But I do know that one of the things that, as you were talking, I was thinking about was that a lot of people, I think particularly men, but I think everybody, both men and women, can pretty much list their partners if they think long and hard enough about it and everything. I don't know how many people, and some of them may have an extensive list, some of them may have a shorter list, but depending on their own sexual desires and pursuits and different other personality traits and things of that nature. I don't know how many can actually explain the relationships, because the relationships have a lot of nuances in them. So I think that they probably, I could probably name various partners. Now, if you ask me to explain the nature of the relationship, that might be a little bit harder to do and everything, because like I said, my narrative and their narrative, for one, might not be the same, and two, I might try to, and I think many people might try to couch the narrative because you don't want to either hurt their reputation or necessarily even hurt your own reputation and things in that space. But I just wondered, am I wrong in thinking that a lot of people can definitely tell you who their partners were, but if you ask them the reason that they had those partners, sometimes, except for those that might have been sexual relationships of opportunity, for lack of a better term, and everything, they couldn't explain the reason that they were in the long-term relationships, particularly as the relationships went further and further outside of existence.
Right. I think people sometimes don't know, and then other times they have their own story, right?
Mm-hmm.
What they think and how it affected them, and that's what goes on to maybe inform their life in some way or another. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of confusion and mystery around intimate relationships, in part, again, because we're not providing people the education that they need. Like I'll often say, we would never think as a parent to say to a child, you're going to start driving 16, 17 years old, but I don't want you to know anything about it now, because it could just be dangerous for you. It's going to make you want to go out and drive the car. So I'm going to make sure that you just don't get any information except for all the danger about cars. And then when you turn 16 or 17, I'm going to hand you car keys and expect that you're going to be able to be safe. We would never do that, right? We would never do that. And yet, intimate relationships are complex. We are complex as people. And so understanding our emotional development, our physical development, our sexual development is really important. And then understanding something about how to do relationships, how you do conflict, how you do communication, right? These are all complex things that actually children and growing up adolescents could really use a lot of guidance to help them be successful when they get out there to do that. But we don't tend to provide it. And a lot of parents, they didn't get it, and their parents didn't get it, and their parents didn't get it. And what they did get is a lot of fear often, and probably some reactivity,
Right.
So when they were found to do whatever, finding their genitals at 2 years old, whatever it was, the parents were often very reactive about that. Like, don't, that's dirty, don't touch that, and kids are doing what's natural for them. And so
Right.
when you do something that's natural as a child and you get in trouble for that, it's super confusing for that child because they think, I don't really know what I'm getting in trouble for. I was just being me, right?
Just being you,
Um,
exploring the body and things along those lines. But doesn't, to add to confusion, I know it's with the title of one of your other books, everything I mentioned, I definitely want to get to some of the shameless parenting and everything, but you also talk about in one of your books about the religious aspect. And I
yes,
have had the pleasure or displeasure, depending on the situation of, I'm still even in my 60s in that single space. So I have dated women that have come from that church environment. And I can tell you that quite often there is two things, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this.
yes,
One is I think that there is a guilt complex because oftentimes, because of what they are being preached at in the church, that if we make it to the point that there is a sexual relationship, that as soon as it's over, there is a push toward marriage, even though that might not have been what either party really wanted to have in the moment and everything. But there's a push to like,
sure.
we did this, it was quote unquote dirty and everything, and therefore we need to get married. I also think that there is a double standard because I think that the man's groups, and I've been to one or two of them, kind of do the standard male conversation of and I'm going to use an R&B song, you got to shop around and things of that nature, where they are teaching the women you have to be pure as driven snow and all along those lines, which is totally opposed to each other, because we're telling the man, go out there and if you see and it's getting be women in the church or women outside the church and date 10, 15, or 20, but then you're telling the women that they have to be pure as driven snow and everything. So it seems like that's a lot of contradictions within the church environment.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I wrote a book called Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy, because this one really came out of my work with students and clients. And I was asking, well, how did sexuality become so negative in the church overall? Like, I don't understand the history. So I did a lot of work really studying the history of what had happened. And then I asked the question, well, if it's been sex negative because of the mind body split that happened like 300 AD or BC, and then it continued on, we had this mind body split where the Greeks saw the body as good, but not eternal. Ideas were eternal. And that's how the philosophers thought. So it was, we already had a mind body split in culture way back before the beginning of Christianity. And then when the Christian church became kind of an empire church, in other words, Constantine was an emperor in the 4th century. He became a Christian. So then he had the power to begin to appoint all the people who would make up this new church, right? In a more institutional way. They were all those men at that time in the 4th century, they were all vying for power based on who could deny the body the most. So movies like the Da Vinci Code kind of give you a glimpse into the way that things were way back then. And so there was this idea that if you could deny the body, that the body was bad, the body was going to take you away from God, but your spirit would be wanting you to go towards God. And so there was this further bifurcation of the body's over here, it's not to be trusted, the spirit is good. And that really set the stage for all the negativity that came after that point. And like you say, there was this double standard even then. So even then in the 4th century, we know this because of Augustine's life, that the men, when they could not deny their body completely, which is very difficult to do, or I'm not sure that we're supposed to. Or the men would blame the women. Well, you're too much of a temptress. Look,
Right.
how am I supposed to deny myself? Look at you, right? So women would get blamed for the actions of men. We have continued that in our society, right?
Mhm.
If a woman is raped, they'll often say, well, what were you wearing?
Mhm.
Were you drinking? They will blame the victim, but they won't hold the person who's responsible for the violence. They won't hold that person necessarily accountable. And so so women have grown up afraid of what they look like and if that's going to incite something in someone else,
Mhm.
right? And they've been afraid to access their own sexuality and pleasure because if you do, we have very choice words for those women,
Mhm.
right? And so you see women closing themselves down, being afraid, feeling like I need to get married in order to stay pure. And then we have men really being left off the hook to do whatever they want, but also not think about, an invitation to think about what do you really want? What's going to create a happy relationship for you? It's not about using women because that's obviously not going to make anybody happy to use
Right.
people, but we sell that idea to men and then we expect them to be happy with a relationship that maybe doesn't have the level of intimacy that actually he would really like to have, but no one helped him know how to cultivate that and take responsibility and know what intimate emotional things are. We don't even let men have their emotions half the time, right? Except for anger. So it made it, I think, really, like you say, especially in our straight relationships, just a lot of conflict there
Mhm.
because women had been turning themselves off and men had been objectifying women in ways that didn't honor who they were. And then they get together and the relationship struggles a lot.
Because
Yeah.
we actually did another show. It's actually my friend Raven's show, and she did a special actually this past Sunday because it's usually an evening show at 9 o'clock. But she had a person that was involved in the tantra space and
Yes.
definitely involved in tantric relationships and all of that. And we were actually having a conversation both on and off the show and everything. Because, like I said, it's Raven's show, so she did the interview. But I did ask because I produced that show in the chats and everything about the notion of some of the sexual habits that I was thinking one way, and apparently this particular young lady was thinking another way, and everything. Because I've always been of the opinion that certain sexual habits are more accepted in the female community than they are in the male community. And she was saying, "Hold on, Mark, time out. I don't know that I necessarily buy that because what we are told is that it is more acceptable to have self-satisfaction, masturbation in
Right.
the female community than it is in the male community. At least that's what we are sometimes told and everything. But she was of the opinion that that is changing and that it is actually much more acceptable for a male to be involved in that space and it's actually acceptable. And I'm going like, no, most of the guys that I know are very much, while they will admit that they do that on a regular basis, they will also do so with shame in their voice and things
Right.
of that nature.
Right. No, and you are right on the money. It's interesting because I think what really happened was there was a recognition from the very beginning of the development of the Christian church, and I think probably before that too, but there was an awareness of male sexuality,
Mhm.
right? But there was an absolute kind of ignorance or ignoring of female sexuality. She was just supposed to manage the men, make sure they behaved, and turn herself off, really. And
Mhm.
so we didn't pay much attention to what women were doing. We
Mhm.
know now because of research that 99% of men masturbate and over 80% of women masturbate. And
Right.
it's likely been that way, but we just haven't been looking at
Mhm.
women at all. And now we have many, many more conversations with what we need to understand. And again, if we understood sexual health, we would be like both uh, all the genders are
Mhm.
going to be often discovering their bodies around a year old as soon
Right.
as that diaper comes off. And they're going to find out that there are a whole lot of nerve endings at the head of the penis and on the clitoris. And as soon as their hands find their way there, it is a great day for them. Now, the parents don't always think so. And that's where you start getting the shame, because somebody got angry with you as you were just normally developing, right? And so we end up having women slowly turn themselves off, and they feel a lot of shame for what they feel. And we have men who are getting sort of one message about sowing oats and doing all of that, but then another message that somehow their sexuality is bad, it's dangerous, it's, not to be trusted, they're not to be trusted. And none of those things are helpful for either one, because at the core of it, people are actually more similar than they are different gender-wise. And they want to be seen, known, loved, and accepted. And that includes their bodies and sexuality. And yet we don't raise them to have those skills and to see that as a good thing. We're doing this other thing.
Yeah, but fascinating conversation, and we'll continue more of that later on with definitely that guest that we had and everything. But another guest that I had invited also has been involved in the space of studying a lot of interesting information, and have had them on before and everything. But Deborah Driggs is with us, and she's probably listening to that conversation going like, wow, I think I've had this conversation before on other podcasts and on other spaces that she's been on, even in this show as well, because I know part of what Deborah talks about is the no more distraction, the no more pain, the no more struggling, and the no more suffering, and all of that. Because unfortunately, as the past guest was talking about, we sometimes get too caught up in some of the nuances of culture that also get us in trouble, and all along those lines. And actually, at some point, I don't think it had happened yet. Later on in that interview, we even talked about some of the imagery that goes on in the society. And I do know that Deborah was a former person that had done some of that nude modeling and all of that, because that came up in the last interview that we had, and all along those lines. So definitely a lot of times we all have negative energies and these distractions that get in our way, and Deborah is trying to get us to change a lot of these attitudes, because too often we get caught up in some of this madness and all of that. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about what's going on just in our world, because as we talked about last time, and actually I brought it up with that guest as well, and folks will hear some more of that interview at a later time, if not later today, later on in the week. But we talked about that constantly needing outward validation, whether the validation that you're good enough, that you are positive enough, that you are good enough for the relationship, and all of that. And that can actually be a bad habit. But we do know that there are a lot of folks that are constantly looking for that outward validation and looking for people to actually help them be in a quality space and all of that. And sometimes those people may even be given the outward validation for their own selfish reasons. And I think that if I remember your story correctly, that has happened to you in some past situations and all along those lines. So, one, Deborah, it's great to see you again. It's always great when you're able to pop in and share your stories and all that you've been through, whether that's overcoming addictions, or whether that's seeing that there are such a thing as unhealthy relationships, and realizing that you don't need to be in those and all of that. But the first time I met you, when I first did our first interview, I found you to be a warm and wonderful person, and just am glad to have you back on this space as well, to share more of your story and to share more of what's going on in your life, and just the positivity that you exude, but also some of the things that you went through.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me back, and it's good to be back. And yeah, I was reflecting on what you said about, that sometimes we get in these relationships that are not healthy and they're not serving us. But
Right.
those relationships also teach us. And those are the ones that we have that choice, to either grow or keep continuing that pattern. And so it's fascinating that sometimes it takes that work to go through a relationship or a circumstance in life that's not serving us, And sometimes that pattern will repeat itself over and over until we finally go, okay, time to grow, time to learn, time to move on. And that can be the struggle for a lot of people.
Right.
That's what I have found in just the work that I do and the writing that I do, that tends to be the struggle, is the surrender and the letting go of those negative things that happen in our life, because they're going to happen.
They're going to happen, and there's this surrendering and the letting go. And then there's also, it's almost like we have a hierarchy of what we consider to be what is acceptable. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, because I know that definitely people can be addicted to all kinds of things. We can be addicted to food. We can be addicted to drugs. We can be addicted to alcohol. We can even be addicted to sex and porn and things of that nature. But I think that sometimes certain ones of those addictions are in our society. This is just my thought, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. More
Yeah.
accepted than others, because I think that it is much easier for somebody to go into a room like of strangers and tell somebody that I am going to an NA meeting or I am going to an AA meeting than it is for them to go into a room and say I am going to a Sex Anonymous meeting or whatever the point equivalent is, or even a food addiction room, because I don't know that those are seen by society to be as quote unquote legitimate. I know that they're legitimate, but I don't know that we as an overall society take them as seriously as addictions as we do the more mainstream addictions, which is, of course, is alcohol.
Well, it's funny. It's funny that you're bringing this up, because I was thinking about this today, because my struggle over the years has been alcohol. I'm very open about that I suffered for many years with the struggle of drinking and what it did to me. But what I was reflecting on in some of my writing this morning was, it's the one thing that we can just go and self-medicate with. Like, I can go and buy alcohol, a poison that poisons my body, and I have the freedom to do that, where with everything else, you either get it on the street or you get a prescription, because you can get alcohol in a prescription form, and then you get the whole mixing of these things. And so, thank God drugs is not a part of my story, because I'd be dead. That is for sure. That's a given, because I just, for me, it was just more. But my big addiction was alcohol. And it was so accessible that I could medicate myself, and so I think about that a lot. I think about all addictions. And I think that with all addictions, whether it's shopping, sex, love, codependence, alcohol, drugs, pills, there are many forms of addictions. And I think in today's society, I hope that we understand that more, because really it's under the umbrella of mental illness. There's an illness there. And so I think that we're finally understanding that these things, they're more prevalent than they were hidden before. Nobody talked about it. We didn't talk about we had a sex addiction. We just went and hid with that addiction. But today, I think it's more open. There are more programs to go to and work on. And, I don't know what makes somebody an addict, or, there's definitely a lot of research still being done on that subject. But, it doesn't help growing up in a family where most of the people in your family are alcoholics, are heavy drinkers. And so that doesn't help, your environment doesn't help. But I know people that grew up and nobody drank and they became an alcoholic. So, there's a lot of curiosity. It's very curious as to what really defines an addict. And there was a lot of addiction in my family. I know growing up, it wasn't just alcohol. I mean, there were drugs. My grandmother was a pill popper. There was kleptomania. That was a high for her, to just be able to steal something, even if it was a $5 item. It was just very bizarre. She'd have drawers of these things that she was a klepto. So there's all there, that, like I said, it all kind of falls under the umbrella of this mental illness. And so it's interesting because, now that all my grandparents have left, they've passed on. And, I was fortunate enough to, when my grandmother was dying, to get a book that my grandfather had written. And I've spent the last 2 years putting my heart and soul into this thing, financially, emotionally, just all of it, to kind of re-edit it. So I'll show you. We get a little sneak peek. So I got a galley. This is the galley of the book. It's called Son of a Basque. And the real book, the actual book, will come out in October. But what was inspiring about this, talking about all these addictions and all of that, is that I read a lot of stuff in this book that I had no idea. I had no idea the trauma. I had no idea the pressure that was put on this man. He lost his father when he was 10 years old, and he became the man of the house.
Wow.
And he had 8 siblings, and they grew up on a beet farm, pulling beets, and they got chased out of Mexico by Pancho Villa. I mean, there's so many incredible stories, and I didn't know, who knew? I saw my grandfather a certain way as a child, but reading a book, and it's a historical fiction, it's not an autobiography, it's based loosely on his life. But even so, I learned a lot about him, and that's what really, really got me fascinated to really start looking at other parts. That's just one grandparent.
Right.
I kind of regret not knowing that kind of information about all my grandparents.
Yeah.
And so I would say to anybody, take the time to really learn your genetic history, because I think all of that trauma that my grandfather suffered, and he fought, and he was in 3 wars. He was in World War II, and he went to Korea, but didn't fight in the Korean War, but he fought, and he was in Vietnam. So just all that gets passed down then to my mother, then gets into my nervous system without me even knowing why. Why is all this there? And I really believe that. Other people listening might be going, what is she talking about? That's like a fugazi. But I believe that. I believe in that kind of energy. I believe that stuff gets passed down generation until somebody finally says, okay, I want to learn more so that I understand what's really going on and why my nervous system is acting up, and then I want to self-medicate, or I want to do, yeah.
But speaking of passing down generation to generation, one of the things I may have brought this up with you the last time we talked, but I don't remember. But it's something I'm curious about, and everything is that we have all these different addiction groups, and I've named some of them earlier, whether it's NA or whether it's AA or whether it's a number of the other addiction groups that are out there and everything. But I've had the pleasure, because some of them were having their meetings at cultural arts centers that I have been associated with, of talking and even becoming friends and acquaintances with people that have gone through different addictions. And I think we all have an addiction of one sort or another. But I was wondering, even within the 12-step programs that NA and AA are, and even to some degree, Sex Anonymous is as well, one of the problems that I see with those organizations, and I'm not saying that it's all the time the case, is that it seems like they allow the passing of, and I don't think that they do it intentionally, but the passing of one addiction to another. Because I can't tell you how many times I've had people that have been, say, going to an NA meeting regularly telling me that they've got to go get their fix on chocolate. Isn't that just exchanging one addiction for another and everything?
It's unfortunately, it's part of the problem. That happens. It happened to me. The minute I gave up alcohol, I was eating bags of liquor. It goes to something else, because there's a need to fill something that's missing, or it's like if you're giving up, especially a habit that you've been doing your whole life, then yes, it's very common. And that's why they serve coffee and donuts at a lot of these meetings, to keep you off of the main thing that you're trying to quit. So if getting off of drugs, it takes you to a sugar addiction, then that's probably a lot better than staying with a drug that's probably going to kill you.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's very common. And I see that a lot. I can see that in myself, and that's the first place I always want to check in with is what's going on. Why am I reaching for that? Why do I feel the need to eat a whole bag of licorice right now, or a bag, or reach for sugar? What is going on? And so that's, that comes up a lot in meetings,
No, I can
where
believe that
people,
would come up a lot in me because I was also thinking about friends of mine that have gone through certain sorts of relationship trauma, whatever that relationship trauma is, whether that was them feeling that they were addicted to sex or feeling that they were addicted to porn or whatever. And then they would, in some cases, I'm not saying in all cases, in some cases, they might turn it to something that in and of itself sounds like it would be a positive, but I wonder if you're going into it for the wrong reasons. Because I've heard some people that have gone away from these negative forces and then got totally wrapped up into like mindfulness practices and yoga practices and things along those lines. And
oh, well,
then,
then the more the merrier for that. I mean, that would be the hope, to go down
yeah,
in those directions of mindfulness and yoga and prayer and meditation and all those things that really we were really intended to do, I believe,
right,
as humans. I think those are the things that add so much value to our life. I was actually just listening to something today uh, with Wayne Dyer.
mhm,
I every day put something new on to trigger a different thought. But he was talking about silence and how it's the one place we can go where you can't divide it, you can't cut it. It's like, it's just silence. And whether
yeah,
you want to call it meditation or whatever, I actually like to call it sitting in silence,
mhm,
because that's when things get real clear, is when there's no distraction, there's no device, there's no outside something. It's just you and your thoughts. And it can be really hard for people to do that. And when you call it meditation, that can be intimidating. But the
right,
way he was talking about this today when I was listening to it was just sitting in silence, and really nothing happens except it's quiet. And it's kind of this really beautiful time to have in
mhm,
your daily practice, to just sit and do nothing, just sit and be quiet. And that can be really hard for people who are anxious,
right.
but yet so beneficial.
Yeah, very beneficial. Why do we think that we as a people, and you mentioned it in your web page and everything, and particularly those that are in the addiction space, but I think it is people just in general, why do we need so much outward validation and everything? Because I know even in some of my own relationships, I've always wanted to, have the approval of the relationship, whether it's the approval of family, the approval of friends. There probably even been cases where I didn't feel that the person that lived up to what I felt were the perceived standards that people think that I may have and everything. So I might have even hidden them out of the public, whether that was because of their fluctuating weight or whatever perceptions that I had of people and all of that and everything. And I'll admit some of my faults, and I've done that and everything. But why do you think we have this need to have outward validation?
Certainty is the
Hmm.
first word that comes to mind. It's a certainty. There's some type of certainty that needs to be addressed. And also, I think we have the most expectations on ourselves. And
Right.
then what happens is, because we have such high expectations for how we're doing things, that gets projected onto other people around us without us even knowing. It's a very unconscious thing. But I would say certainty. I think a lot of people are searching for certainty and significance.
That makes sense. And they're probably
And
also,
yeah, yeah.
I said, they're probably also missing opportunities. Because I'm imagining that when you were more active in the, and I'm not saying you're not now even, but more active in the modeling and the TV space and everything, there were probably times that you were um, dating or involved with fellow actors and fellow entertainers because that was the perception. The perception was that, those that are in the on the A list or even the AB list and everything, that they're going to be hanging out with their fellows on the AB list, even though the plumber that might have come and fixed your house might have been the person that you need to be with, and all of that. But there's the perception of the Hollywood elite hanging out with the Hollywood elite.
Well, I'd like to reframe that and say that it's proximity. I think that when we are in proximity of certain people, then that's usually just out of convenience who we end up. If I was in real estate, I might be dating a realtor. So, and a real great example of this is, Elizabeth Taylor married somebody she met in rehab because she was in proximity to this person. So it really, for me, it doesn't really come down to, the actors marry actors. Not necessarily. I think it's who we're in proximity to, and I met my husband in acting class. We met in an acting class and we were in proximity of each other. I don't know that he and I would have ever met if we hadn't been in that class. I think it's like marrying your high school sweetheart or marrying somebody you meet in college. When you're in proximity of people, no matter what you're doing. Traveling, you could be in a travel group and meet somebody. You could be in a hiking group. For me, it's more about proximity because, you meet people when you're doing different things. And so for me, I like to put myself in proximity of people that I can learn from and grow from. And, I really want that to be, sorry, that's my son calling.
Son's calling is important.
Is it? So, yeah, I think that is a really good thing, and so that's, you see movie stars, they fall in love on set because they're working on a movie together. And then we see also sometimes that works out and unfortunately most of the time it doesn't.
I was going to say sometimes it doesn't work out, and I think part of the reason it doesn't work out, and the last guest that I had pre-recorded and everything, and that's what was playing before you came on and everything, was that sometimes when it, I don't know that we ask enough questions even in relationships, and that's part of what came up because we were actually talking at some point, just very briefly, about the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp whole trial and everything, because it seems to me that some of those things that we heard about during the public coverage of this whole incident were things that both of them should have known about each other before the trial and before it became a public spectacle. Because it seems to me that if you are in
there was a lot of that relationship. That relationship was so textbook of two people trauma bonding, and one has an attachment style, one has an avoidance style, and you're seeing all these different things play out. And unfortunately for the world, we watched a very toxic relationship that 80% of the, I'm going to say 70% of the population has been in at one time or another some type of toxic relationship. Theirs just got played out on TV. I actually have so much empathy and compassion for both of them. They both really need to just go and move on and heal and really learn from their part in the situation. They both had a part in that situation. Her part a little bit scarier because she really believes those things that she talks about, and it's so obvious that a lot of it was not true. And it's like if I was managing her, I would have said, leave the trial, go be with your child, and move on, and stop doing interviews, stop talking, you're just talking about the same nonsense, and it's sad. It's like, move on and heal. And to go back to the original thing you said, that we don't get to know people before we get into these relationships. One of the things when I coach people is I always say, date somebody from the neck up, meaning It's all great when it's hot and heavy and everybody's got this great wild chemistry. That seems like, oh, it was so meant to be. And then you get into this relationship and a year later you're going, wait a minute, hold on. From the neck up, there's nothing going on. And so I always say, why don't you get to know people from the neck up and make sure you're on the same page when it comes to all these different ways that you want to live and the things you want to do and the things you believe in, because values and beliefs will pull people apart quicker than anything. It's usually not a lack of love that ruins relationships. It's usually a lack of value and beliefs on they have different and they're butting heads. And so, yeah, I highly recommend, and that was a perfect example, the Depp Heard case, because it's a perfect example of getting to know people from the neck up and what they're really about.
It's interesting you say that, because you talked about getting to know people from the neck up, and I've actually had a couple of friends that we've had those conversations and everything. But I guess my question for you, and I don't know the answer, and maybe you don't know the answer either, is there such a thing as getting to overly know somebody? Because I do know that sometimes, even in relationships, sometimes people want to share their entire story, like their pains with their family, whether theirs are current pains or past pains, and all along those lines, and sometimes even the pains of their jobs and the pains of their even family dynamics if they have kids and everything. And I sometimes wonder, can it be a case of rushing into that kind of information too fast, too soon? Or do you think that you need to learn that at an early part of the relationship?
No, I think it's too fast, too soon. I think those conversations are for coaches, therapists, mentors, not when you're trying to get to know somebody. I would really recommend saving really personal, intimate, maybe stories that are difficult for professional people or coaches or mentors or whoever it is that you share your stuff with, before you share it with anybody that you might be thinking about. And even I'm real careful, because you want to be very careful, because sometimes in relationships, the things that you trust somebody with can be used against you later. So not that I'm not saying hold back and not be open. I think if you get to that place where you really do have that connection and that trust, but that's an earned thing to have, and it doesn't happen right away. So I wouldn't be sharing things that are private to me with somebody I'm getting to know. When I say get to know somebody from the head up, I mean, what are their beliefs and values? I don't need to know their stories or their traumas, or that's too much. And I always say, take that problem to the professional or to the sponsor or to the coach, mentor, whoever you use. Everybody should have one person in their life that they share those things with, not somebody you're trying to get to know in the beginning. In the beginning, you're getting to know things like, what are your hobbies? What do you like to do? What do you value most? Are you in a family? Are you a loner? Do you like to hike? Do you like to travel? Some people don't like to travel. I'm a huge traveler, so I obviously wouldn't match up well with somebody who didn't like to travel.
That makes a lot of
So
sense.
that's the kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff in the beginning you want to start to kind of. And then also the other thing I always like to add on to that is become the person you want to date.
No, that makes a lot of sense. But as you were saying that, I was just thinking. As you were saying that, I was just thinking to myself about a term that became more popular lately and everything. I mean, it's been out there before, but I think it's become more of an internet meme, and definitely more people are using it to describe themselves and everything. And that's this notion of somebody that is turned on as much by the brain as they are by the body and the body parts. And that's the whole notion of those that pride themselves on being what they call sapiosexual and things of that nature. And as I was thinking about that whole nature, I was thinking that this is my observation. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Is that just like there are hot and heavy relationships with relationships, meaning that they're, they get together, they get hot and heavy at the beginning of the relationship, and then maybe at some point that tempers off and everything. That initial chemistry is still there, but it's not as hot and as heavy as it was in the early part of the relationship. I think that sometimes happens with people that fit into that sapiosexual space as well, where they have these really deep, hot and heavy conversations that might last for hours on end when they first meet, and even those that don't call themselves sapiosexuals and everything. But then after a while, life happens, things start slowing down, and you don't necessarily have the 2-hour conversation. It might peter down to like a 20 or 30-minute conversation, and you're both okay with that and everything. But do you think that is also sometimes what happens in a relationship, is that natural trend to be going full force in some cases, folks would say diving all the way in, is natural at the beginning of any part of the relationship, whether that's the sexual or the mental part, and then things just naturally slow down?
Yeah, that's a big. Which part do you want me to answer?
any and all of it.
Yeah, everything is big in the beginning. There's, in the beginning of a relationship, everything that person does is fabulous. Everything in life is fabulous. Everything is great. When you're in the beginning stages of a relationship, it's all amazing. Everything the person says, you just hang on every word. It's all just, oh, he's the best or she's the best. And then obviously that does start to fade out. All of a sudden, the things that you really loved about that person start annoying you. And so, these are the things that really, that's what I'm saying. If Alison Armstrong says this the best, she's like, if you have that feeling like it's all hot and heavy in the beginning, run. Like run. And it's, we laugh, it's funny, but it's kind of true. It's the hot and heavies usually don't make it. They don't last. The obviously, look at Brad and Angelina Jolie. You couldn't have two hotter people on the planet, and they get divorced, and people around are going, if they can't stay married, like what's going on? And I use them as an example because they're just two beautiful.
They're two beautiful individuals, but you also
individuals.
have
you would think, oh my God, they have it all. They're both A-list movie stars. They, they exude this really amazing energy. But, that's what I'm saying. It's all hot and heavy in the beginning, and everything's great. But then later on down the line, it's interesting. It really is interesting and fascinating that the things that you really thought were great in the beginning start to really annoy you. And so that's why, I don't know, I'm really careful, when I meet people, I have a real good sense immediately, like, am I going to want to listen to this person talk,
Right.
for the rest of my, like I think about the future, like this is great at this moment, but am I going to want to hear this conversation again in 6 months down the line? Or am I going to want to, or do I line up with the things that this person likes? And that happens a lot. Like I'll go on dates with people and they talk about things that they do in life, and they could be the greatest person on the planet, but those aren't things that I do and I'm not interested in. And so I'm real careful to jump into something just because something feels a certain way, when I know down the line that the things that person really likes to do are going to start to annoy me because I don't do those things. I don't sit on Sunday and watch football, or Monday or whatever it is. I'm not I'm not going to go to sporting events, or, there's just certain things that, I'm not going to align up with everybody, and that's okay. That's why I say when you get to know somebody from the neck up with those few simple things look different. And it's also interesting too when you do it sober, because for many years I was dating and drinking, and everything looks completely different when you're under the influence. When I look back on some of the relationships. I wouldn't have had coffee with that person, let alone a relationship. So, that's the other thing too, is to be really careful because,
No, I've had some
people,
hindsight relationships where I've gone back and been like, "What the heck were you thinking, Mark?" So I
yeah, and
know exactly what you're
eh,
talking about, where you're going like, and it wasn't even
yeah,
their addiction or uh, my addictions or whatever our habits were and everything. It's just that after a while, you started reflecting on what either you put them through or they put you through, and you're going like, "No, I don't know what I was thinking at that time." But sometimes we don't also like to accept the red flags that are out there and everything, because a lot of times they were already red flags that I knew, but I wanted to ignore the red flags, thinking that I could conquer those red flags or that I could
yeah,
bypass those red flags. But
yeah. And
we know.
we know that usually isn't the case. Those red flags usually add more red flags.
Right.
It's like, oh, this is getting worse, not better.
Makes it a lot worse and everything. How important do you think it is to um, even within relationships, because you're talking about having those common interests and everything along those lines and everything. So I'm still hoping to go to a Minnesota Vikings game as I am a diehard Vikings, and I have been to at least one or two Carolina games. So if I ever come out there and visit the West Coast, I'll be sure not to ask Deborah to go to the football game. I'll just go to the game and then we'll go have coffee afterwards and all along those lines. But how important do you think it is to have space? Because there is a couple that you actually were booked for her show and everything. And I think that part of the reason that they've been together forever, and I do mean forever, is because they have a lot of space between them. He's got his own business. She's a multi-billionaire, if not millionaire, and everything. But I think that the reason that Oprah and Stedman get along is because Stedman has given Oprah a whole lot of space. And I think the same can be said of Oprah to Stedman Graham, that is.
Yeah, I don't have really a thought about that, because I don't really know much about. I know obviously about Oprah, but I
Right.
don't really know anything about him or their relationship, or how that looks. But if that works for them, that's beautiful.
But just in general, do you think that it's good to have space in a relationship? It's like I know sometimes people will even talk about needing their man or woman cave, even if they're living together. I think that's really where I was going with the question.
Yeah, I absolutely do, because I know I absolutely. That's why I created Deb's Den,
Hmm.
because Deb's Den is kind of. I grew up with men talking about their man cave, and I had friends in high school, guy friends that had man cave. They were in the garage with their band and they're doing their thing. And we didn't do that. We didn't have our girl caves. So I created Deb's Den with the thought that it's the place to go. And I think we all need a place, a sanctuary in our home, in our space, that we go to just be with ourself, and that's okay. So my den, my space is a place where I write, I read, I listen to podcasts, I write blogs, I work out of my den. Um, there's things in my den that remind me of who I am and what I want out of my life. It's filled with things that help me to stay connected to that. Just like men have their man caves or their office space or whatever, those are things that remind them of what they do and what their life's about. And so I that's how Deb's Den got created. And in Deb's Den, where it started to grow, is that I started writing a weekly blog and reflecting on what that den was and why I created it, and what it is a reminder to help me stay in a very, my goal right now is to be in growth and contribution. It's also to be in a, I like to surrender a lot to a lot of things I have no control over. And the one thing I do have control over is my space.
Mhm.
So that's where Deb's Den came from, because I think that people like to have some type of control, and there's not a lot we have control over, but we do have control over creating a space for ourselves. And so I have on my website a resource page where I literally list everything that's in my den, the playlist that I listen to is I share with people who subscribe to my website and subscribe to my newsletter. I share on my website everything basically that I do,
Right.
and how I have created this life, this journey. And so a lot of the people that follow me and read my weekly blogs will email me and send me messages, and sometimes I get questions, or sometimes people will ask me, could you write about something that I'm going through? And I love that, because I get to a place sometimes where I'm like, what am I going to write about this week? And so yeah, it's kind of been this really nice community that I actually felt like we talked earlier about, there's all these meetings that we can go to for
Right.
different things that we struggle from, whether it's overeating or alcohol or drugs, or all these different meetings. And that's kind of what I was hoping to build with my website, was a place where people could come and feel safe and share with me things that maybe they don't want to share in a group setting, or if they want to book a consultation, to just be coached. I have a couple people that I coach right now that you know for some reason I'm attracting people that are suffering with addiction, and that's fine. And so it's it's been a really beautiful thing. I enjoy it so much, and I had no intention of ever, I went through all this training. I did the NLP training. I did all this life coach training, never with the intention of becoming a coach or becoming a mentor to anybody. I really did it for myself, to be
Right.
truthful. I did it because I wanted to learn more about communicating and understanding my stuff, to be my coach. It's kind of the same thing. I got yoga certified with no intention of ever teaching yoga, but I wanted to learn more about the practice of yoga. But through the life coaching world, I decided that no, I actually really enjoy it. And so it's been a really beautiful transitioning into, and I have a book coming out next month on July 7th. Actually, there's one day we're doing the launch where you can get the book. You can download it for $1.99. And it's called Here Comes the Sun, and it's all women authors.
Oh wow.
And I collaborated with this group, and I'm a guest author in the book, but we're all talking about some type of dark time that got us into the light. And that's why the book is called Here Comes the Sun. And so it's going to be kind of like a chicken soup for the soul. And I'll be posting about it on my website and on my Facebook page and all my social media.
Sounds like a good birthday present for myself, since my birthday is July 1st. So
Well, there you go. So it comes out July 7th, and so that's a beautiful book. And then my historical fiction, Son of a Basque, will come out in October. And then next year I'm working on my memoir. So there you have it.
I know.
And the best way to stay in touch with me really is at my website. Everything you want to know, like, well, where's her Twitter? Where's her all of it is on my website. It's the easiest place to go. All the books I read, all the things I do, all my resources, they're all there. It's free.
Who are some of your favorite authors and some of your favorite musicians that you're listening to right now, since you've mentioned the books and the music? And I am a big music fan of all sorts, but who are some of the musicians
I'll tell you
and authors?
the last 4 books that I read, I liked all of them. And one I read twice. It's called The War of Art. I can't remember the author. I have it here somewhere. But anyway, I put a lot of sticky tabs in that book because it's a book about people who are creative that struggle with resistance.
Right.
And so that was, I read it twice. It's called The War of Art. And then I read Selma Blair's book at JB, which is so good. And I read it because she suffers with alcoholism, and she actually drank like I drank. So it was really interesting to hear her story. And then I read Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights, which is just a very fun, he's a very spirited writer, very talented, can take very heavy things and make them funny. You know, he's, so I really enjoyed, I read his book in 2 days. It was just an enjoyable read. And then what was the other book I just read? Oh, it's a book that I keep. I usually have it right here by me, but it's called Living in Joy. And it's just a book that I keep on my bedside table that I like to just read a chapter out of in the morning. It just kind of sets the tone for the day. It's just one of those books. I wish I had it right here in front of me. I would share it with you. And then as far as music goes, I'm really into soundtracks. And my favorite soundtracks are Out of Africa and what's the movie? Somewhere in Time. These are great to put on when you want to sit in silence and maybe you can't have it be so quiet, but you want a little background music. If you just go on the journey with the music, it's so profound. So yeah, Out of Africa and Somewhere in Time.
Well, apparently I was hearing some friends of mine were telling me that there is a new musical that apparently won an award recently and everything. So I'm going to try to get that soundtrack because one of the shows that we do is called Interludes on the Pod TV network and all of that. And apparently Strange Loop is a musical with book and music and lyrics by none other than Michael R. Jackson. So definitely got some of that whole kind of music going on in that space, but it definitely sounds like it's got some winning awards. As a matter of fact, I think he just won the Tony recently and everything because they just did the Tony. So that's on my list and everything. I've got to get to hear this musical because they say that the music is fantastic. But I do remember Out of Africa, the movie. So I do remember that
the soundtrack is just one of the most beautiful soundtracks I've ever heard.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And I even remember the soundtrack for what was the old classical one, A Sound of Music, and that had a great soundtrack as well. And I definitely enjoyed that Sound of Music soundtrack and even the soundtrack to The Wiz back in the day and everything. So yeah, soundtracks I am a big fan of, and all along those lines. Why do you think that, because you were, and we kind of alluded to it earlier, but why do you think we are not as able to accept our own strong suits, even if we have strong suits? Because I can tell you that there are a lot of very smart women and a lot of very beautiful women and smart men and beautiful men, well, handsome men, I guess would be the actual term, that don't feel that they are as smart as they are or as beautiful as society thinks that they are, and all along those lines. And then I also know that there are some people that are intimidated by people that are either smart or beautiful and won't even try to approach them, whether as not even in the dating space. Sometimes they won't even try to approach them in the friend space because they are intimidated by what is perceived as either as one form of strength or another, whether that's the strength of success, meaning like maybe they've got money or a good job, or the success of being a beautiful person, or maybe even the success of being athletic and things along those lines. But I was just wondering, it's a two-part question once again, but why are some of the people that fall in that category not as accepting of that category, and two, why are we intimidated?
Well, this is a very interesting question. So my guess would be, and this would only be from my experience,
right?
Because this is where I draw from, and so I would say that even for the little bit of success that I had in the entertainment industry, and and everybody thought, wow, she's on the cover of the magazine and she's doing a movie and she's on, did you see she did that commercial? And I was probably on the outside looking a certain way, but on the inside was probably at the lowest I could have been. I just I didn't feel worthy or deserving, I guess.
Right.
And if I were to guess, just from the work that I've done,
Mhm.
it's from some type of lack of attention that I didn't get from either my mother or my father.
Hmm.
And there's a great question, like, whose love did you crave the most, your mother's or your father's? And a lot of those issues stem from that craving of needing attention and love from a parent that you didn't get it from. So that could be maybe one reason why people that really appear to look a certain way or have a certain amount of success, we see it all the time. They just, on the inside, they fall apart. So the goal is to really figure that out so you don't fall apart, and end up like our very dear friend who we all loved was Robin Williams.
Yeah.
I mean, my God, that devastated me. And I did not know him, but I say that because he came through as everybody's friend, as everybody's, he was so funny and so talented, and it was such a loss. So I use that as an example, like how, like, we all loved this person, but the suffering that he must have been having on the inside must have just been so horrific. And so, yeah, that, I think it comes from not really getting something in our childhood. Something was missing. I don't, that would be my guess. That's something that I've had to really look at. And then as far as being intimidated, I have a quote that I like, which is, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And so I try constantly I don't try, I actually put myself in rooms or in situations that intimidate me, that make me feel like, oh, I'm going to grow from being in this room. And so that's not easy to do. And so that, people could be intimidated by being in a room, and, but you can start small and work your way up to being in bigger and better rooms. So I would say most of the time, the people that we're really intimidated from, we shouldn't be, because
Correct. Exactly.
because most people really are approachable.
Mhm.
Some aren't. That's okay, but most people really are.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you on that. What's a room or a situation that you would like to be placed in that you haven't, that is like on your dream list? Maybe it's an appearance at a White House dinner. Maybe it's an appearance at, I don't know what it would be. I'm not going to put it in your brain and everything, but what's a,
Well, this
speaking
might
of,
shock this might shock people listening, but I would actually like to be in a room with Donald Trump. And I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
I was not a fan of how he conducted a lot of the things that he did while he was president, but I would love to have the opportunity to just talk to him and ask certain questions about why. So he would be on in my top 3. I would definitely want to ask him some questions. He fascinates me because he had such this great opportunity to do. I think he would have been reelected if he would have just stopped talking so much, and so, yeah, he was fascinating for me to watch, just the ego and so he's one person. I would give anything really to spend a White House dinner or be in the White House. That would be interesting for sure, to meet people that are in a world that I know nothing about,
Okay.
to be in proximity of those types of people. And then I think it would be also very fascinating to be around royalty, and really know what that world's about. I'm kind of fascinated with the Queen and and that whole world. That would be a fascinating experience too, to be around, royalty and what that feels like. What is that about?
Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
fascinating. I've actually had an interest in that royalty even back when Diana was living, and some of the other
Yeah.
ones that have gone on and all of that. But even like some of those that were associated with the Kennedys and other royal
Yeah.
families there in the U.S. and everything. I think it was Onassis that was associated with them
Yeah.
and everybody. So definitely, I can feel you on that. It would be also be interesting. I have a hard enough time with fear of water, so I know I'm not going to try to go into the ocean, even though I'd go on a cruise in a heartbeat. But I would probably be fascinated if I could find a way to do it safely with going into space, because space does fascinate me and interest in it and everything. But
I would do
then
that in a heartbeat.
so you would go,
I would definitely go into space. Yeah.
yeah,
In a heartbeat.
yeah, that would be
Would
fascinating.
not have to twist my arm to go to space. I would, that would be like the ultimate.
Yeah, I can see that being the ultimate. You mentioned Trump. Now, would you want to meet that other interesting character that is totally invading the country and we can't figure out why, or would you just like try to avoid Putin at all costs?
Yeah, I don't know if I have any interest in meeting him.
Gotcha.
I don't. There's nothing about him that's intriguing. I don't have a lot of respect.
Yeah,
With Donald Trump, it's like he's fascinating to me because with this huge ego and the horrible things that would come out of his mouth, yet on the other side, he raised these amazing human beings. He's got a beautiful family and he's got great kids and great, educated. They all want to be of service. They all are really well, they're not on drugs. They're not out, he's got a very interesting life. And so that's fascinating to me, that he has this, he can be so awful and yet so good. And that is fascinating.
Yeah, that is very fascinating and everything. How important do you think it is I was actually talking to a friend of mine, they were going through some issues with their family and everything, but speaking of kids, how important do you think it is to have a good relationship, but also to understand the dichotomy of relationships with your own kids, and if you don't have kids, like I don't have any kids, with those that are in your circle of the next generation? Like I said, I don't have any kids, but I do have my two nephews, and I've got friends' kids that I am part of their friend circle, for lack of a better term.
So the question is, what do I see?
How important do you think it is for the generations to try to connect with each other?
Oh, it's huge. I think more than ever, connection is everything. It really is. It's really important. And it's really important to stop judging each other for each other's opinions.
Right.
Just because we don't. And by the way, I have found this with myself. If somebody says something that it irritates me or it offends me or I get upset or I have this moment, I go, okay, I got to look at myself, because what is it about what they said that's upsetting me? And so I think it's really important, especially in the world we live in, to try harder to understand and to get more curious and to ask more questions, rather than having this immediate judgment about something. And half the time when people say things like, I had somebody, this was crazy. I don't know why this came up. We're talking about Bill Gates. Because I said he's one of those people. Okay, he's a person I would love to meet and talk to, and find out his path and where he started. All of it. You can read about these things, but it's more fun when they talk.
Right.
And so the person I don't like him, and I was like, well, how do you know? Do you know him? No, I just don't like him. I don't like. And by the way, it's something I read and blah blah blah, and that really made me understand that that's what happens in life. We read something on social media, we see something that somebody else said, and then we formed an opinion about somebody we don't even know.
Well, it's not only
And
that,
it's really important to stop doing that and to not have opinions about people we don't even know or spend time with. And
that's it.
so I was like, well, if I get the opportunity to meet him, I'm going to be super grateful for that, and I left it at that. But I think that happens. And this is why also, and I learned my lesson the hard way with social media. It's very tempting to get sucked in and to voice your opinion about stuff on social media. And I just don't do it anymore, because half the time you're dealing with people that have no clue. They don't know the person. They don't know what they're talking about. It's just an opinion behind a safety net of a screen and a typewriter. And so it's not legitimate for me. So I stopped. I had to stop myself and look at why I was getting so sucked into wanting to have some voice in a situation that really has nothing to do with me. And so
But it's not just the people. We also get stuck on issues and everything, because I know a lot of people are being very passionate, and I might have some passionate views as well about what the Supreme Court is doing with Roe versus Wade. I saw a lot of people get very passionate, and yes, I did get both of mine, but I know some people that were anti-vaxxers that were very passionate about not wanting the shot and gave you every reason that they didn't want it, including some that even in some cases made sense, because some of it was historical and some of it was also personal situations, meaning that something happened in their own life.
And the other thing too is I don't think the government really recognized people that had COVID and had the antibodies.
Right.
And now you want to vaccinate them.
Right.
They already suffered through the virus, and 50, not everybody got the antibodies, but a lot of people did. A lot of people had the antibodies, which, by the way, now they want to give it to you. If you get COVID, they want to give you the antibodies that some people already have. So for those people, it's like, why should they be forced to get a vaccine when they already had the virus? They already have the antibodies. And it's about 99% that if you have the antibodies, you're not going to get it again. You're immune. So nobody's recognizing that. And so that's I know I have a lot of people that were very upset about that. Why would I run out and get a vaccine when I already suffered through and had the virus and have all the antibodies? So that's what I'm saying. We need to be more open to understanding both sides. It's not just one way. And we really don't know all the facts about a lot of these things. And we jump to, well, if you're not getting vaccinated, you're not doing the right thing. Well, how do you know? How do you know you're doing the right thing? And so I tend to kind of sit back and keep asking questions. Well, how do you know? Is it true? How do we know? So yeah, I think today more than ever, less judgment and more curiosity would be the key for especially these upcoming generations.
I definitely agree. But the other thing that happens is that it seems that we almost have created this dichotomy, and I'm going to explain what I mean by that, in the sense that just about every problem that we have that is out there, we say that we want to have greater communications, and then we create communication tools like Clubhouse and Facebook and things in the metaverse where we yell at people for actually doing what we say we want people to do, which is communicating. And that's kind of the dichotomy that I was talking about everything.
Totally.
But it seems what'd you say?
I said totally. 100%.
So and that seems to create a whole nother issue, because I would argue that whether it's a relationship, whether it's a work situation, whether it's school situations, that is one of our greatest faults, is that, and actually I had a past guest that even brought this up and everything, is that we're not even teaching about communications or teaching about some of the basic principles, including child rearing and all along those lines. But I was just wondering, what is your take on, are we doing a good enough job of even realizing that we need to be doing a better job of communicating, and what do you think we can do to be better communicators?
Well, to be a really good communicator, I would personally say that spend more time listening.
Mm-hmm.
The more we listen, the more we learn. The more we listen, the more information we get. And half the time, and I'm very guilty of this, and it's a practice for me, because especially when you have kids, you immediately want to give them the answers, or I find myself sometimes cutting them off, and then I go, I'm so sorry, continue. Because that's my mind's working so fast. I'm not even letting them get their thought out. So I have to be really careful with that. So I think to be a really good communicator, it's just listening, really listening before forming any type of opinion, before having an answer. Just listen. And I have taken it as far as now I listen and I don't even say anything, because I have to practice that much on just not having a quick opinion. Now I try to sit with something before I have this quick idea or solution, or I don't have all the answers. And but there's something that makes me think I do sometimes. I don't know. And I am not sure where that's coming from, but I don't have all the answers. And the good news is that most of the time my kids know. Like, I'll say, I don't have the answer for that, but here are some suggestions if you want them.
And don't we need to listen in all forms of listening and everything? Because I was just, as you were talking about listening and everything, I know you got to get ready to go, and we're actually going to wrap up anyway, because I got to produce another Friends show shortly and all of that. But in that same context, I don't know that we listen not just with our ears, but also with the rest of our body and everything. Because I can tell you, and that's part of what I was talking to the other guest about, is that sometimes we don't even listen to signals as well, because the body and the eyes and other things can give us nonverbal signals as well. So I think we need to listen with the ears, but even if you're talking about either any form of intimacy, whether it's sex or just a simple hug, listening to the tones that the body will give as well. And I don't think that we do enough of that either, because I can tell you that I've and I'm going to kind of lambast a group, and I'm not lambasting them totally, because they have some good qualities as well. But I can tell you that as a man that is about to hit the 6 number, I have dated women that came out of the church, and they were fascinated by parts of their own body that they discovered when I was dating them. And that might have been when they were in their 40s and 50s and everything. And they had not even discovered their body in 40 or 50 years of existence, because they got so used to the traditional mode of doing things. So when I send them on an exploration journey, they were going like, whoa, you mean that this kind of like feeling good can happen without us doing the other traditional methods and all of that? But I think that we have to listen to all of the aspects of our body, spirituality, mind, physical, emotional, everything. And I don't think we do enough of that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I just said.
Yeah, I mean, I think that body language is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that's probably 80% of communication is body language. It's not really what people say, it's what people are doing. That's very intriguing and very, I know for acting, that was a huge part of even acting, is watching somebody else's behavior at all times. What are they doing? Why are they doing that?
Right.
So yeah, I think it's huge.
Yeah, I definitely think it's huge. I also think it's good As a matter of fact, I just heard my neighbors upstairs running up. I think that was the one with the dog, but I think it's also good to have connections with other parts of society. So not just our human society, but also our pet society. And I can't remember if you had a pet or not with 4 kids. I'm imagining that there are probably some pets that have at least floated through your life and everything. And actually, this past weekend, I was just cat sitting because my upstairs young neighbors, I think she's 19 and 20, or maybe they're 20 and 21, and they were talking about the nature of having me get their cat because they were going out of town, I think spending time with their mom. So they were like, hey, Mark, can you take care of the cat? And so I gladly took care of the cat. I think this is the 4th or 5th time that I have cat sit for them and all along those lines. So I'm now Uncle Mark to the cat. Just like I was talking about being
There you
Uncle Mark
go.
to the real humans, I'm also Uncle Mark to Meals the cat.
There you go. Well, thank
What
you
is this
so much.
exciting?
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Unfortunately,
I know you got to go, and I
have to go.
want you to get to your rest of the duties. As you know from the last time that you were on, if you can just really quickly tell people where they can find that website, because I was pulling it up. That's actually where I was getting some of my questions for you from, based, and also our last conversation that I do remember and still have great memories of, and of course, any words of positivity that you would like to share with our audience.
Sure. I would say please go to www.deborah.driggs.com. It's my name. It's really simple. If you sign up right now for my weekly newsletter, I have a gift for you that you can download onto your phone. It's just a reminder. Sometimes we need reminders around us. I keep it on my phone. And so I have a free gift there for you. And then on my website is all my information, all my social media, all of that. The books, when they're coming out, will be in my newsletter. So you definitely want to sign up for my newsletter. And I would just say in closing that every day is a gift and that we have to stay in the present moment. We only have today.
I appreciate it, Deborah. I'm glad I got you on for a second time. Might have to get you on for a third or fourth time because I just enjoy your personality. I enjoy how much of a wonderful and lovely person you are and everything. I don't know if you know this, you're all the way in the West Coast and I'm all the way on the East Coast, but you do have another fan here in North Carolina. I thoroughly enjoy
Thank
our
you.
conversations and I look forward to as many as we can have and all of that. So I do
Thank
consider
you so
myself
much.
to be a fan.
Thank you.
So I see you.
Thank you.
No problem. So Deborah is gone. We're going to pull up a little bit of that other interview that I did and share a little bit more of that with you and all. And then later on this evening, in about 30 minutes, we're going to have the Follow the Brand show and all of that. We did have some more of the interview that we did earlier with Dr. Tina. So we're going to bring up a little bit more of that to share with you and all in that space. It probably will not finish the interview, but it was definitely a fascinating conversation and all in that space. So we're going to bring up a little bit more of that and all in that space. And definitely, as it was saying, it was great having that conversation with Deborah Driggs as well. So we've been having a lot of conversation around powerful things and all in that space. Right now, we're going to get on out of here and see what's going on and get ready to bring up some more interviews around what Dr. Tina had to say. But we were talking to Deborah Driggs. Now we're going to see what Dr. Tina has got to say about relationships as well.
But there was an awareness of male sexuality, right? But there was an absolute kind of ignorance or ignoring of female sexuality. She was just supposed to manage the men, make sure they behaved, and turn herself off, really. And so we didn't pay much attention to what women were doing. We know now because of research that 99% of men masturbate and over 80% of women masturbate. And it's likely been that way, but we just haven't been looking at women at all. And now we have many, many more conversations with what we need to understand. And again, if we understood sexual health, we would be like both, all the genders are going to be often discovering their bodies around a year old, as soon as that diaper comes off. And they're going to find out that there are a whole lot of nerve endings at the head of the penis and on the clitoris. And as soon as their hands find their way there, it is a great day for them.
Mhm.
Now, the parents don't always think so. And that's where you start getting the shame, because somebody got angry with you as you were just normally developing, right? And
Mhm.
so we end up having women slowly turn themselves off, and they feel a lot of shame for what they feel. And we have men who are getting sort of one message about sowing oats and doing all of that,
Right.
but then another message that somehow their sexuality is bad, it's dangerous, it's, not to be trusted, they're not to be trusted. And none of those things are helpful for either one, because
Right.
at the core of it, people are actually more similar than they are different gender
Mhm.
wise. And they want to be seen, known, loved, and accepted. And that includes their bodies and sexuality. And yet we don't raise them to have those skills and to see that as a good thing. We're doing this other thing.
Yeah, but isn't the other part of the problem the way? Because I do agree, people want to be, uh, seen and respected and loved and all of that. But as you were saying that, I was thinking a couple of things. One is that the imagery that we get from TV isn't always all that realistic, or from the movies, and I would even argue even from the magazines. And we do know
Right.
that both men and women do look at magazines that it can either be soft porn, because even some of our mainstream magazines, in that some of the advertising can be a variation of
Yes.
soft porn and things of that nature, and definitely those magazines that are true porn and all of that, and
Yeah,
even
right.
the movies that are out there and all along those lines. And then there's some objectification that goes on in those spaces as well, that is truly unhealthy, but it's very much
Yes.
adamant in everything. Because I do know that if you go to just about any site, you're going to find some people that are probably underage and all of that, and they're not even hiding it in some cases. Some cases they're even telling you that it's a young person that is quote unquote seducing the cougar and all along those lines and everything. So it seems like there's some mixed messaging coming from both the blue industry as well as mainstream media as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. We sell fantasy
Hmm.
on porn, on video games, on media. That is what that all is.
Right.
There's cameras behind orchestrating it, right? This is
Right.
all fantasy. But when you don't provide the actual information, then fantasy is what educates people,
Right.
right? And it gives them very unrealistic expectations. We also drive our economy
Mhm.
based on inviting people to feel badly about how they are.
Mhm.
You don't look a particular way, you don't have a particular thing, so you're not as good as those that do, and therefore you need to keep trying to attain that thing, whatever it is. And we drive our economy there. That's how we get people purchasing more things,
Yeah, we
right?
do.
Is
Yeah.
by making them feel that way. And we know from research that it is so effective that we have 6-year-old girls already modifying their diets because they have come to learn that they're not okay the way they are.
Mm.
And 2/3 by the time they're 9, 2/3 of the girls are modifying their diet. And it's 90% by the time they're 15 years old. And so media is incredibly successful in causing people to feel badly about themselves or to have unrealistic expectations about how they are. I mean, we're supposed to have the diversity that we have in the world, sizes, colors, everything.
Right.
And yet that is not how we drive our economy.
No, we drive our economy in a very, hate to put it this way, but in a very white male dominated way,
That is
and
exactly
everything is
right.
there, and that's who actually who's controlling a lot of it. But it's interesting you say that, because I was actually just thinking about another conversation I've had both on this show and with other shows that I've been part of, which is kind of how unfortunately, we can also sometimes sell ourselves short and everything along those lines. Because I know I've been guilty of that and everything. Because unfortunately, I do think that sometimes in society, there is this aspect that you're supposed to have the quote unquote right job, the right car, the right house, and all of that and everything. And if you don't have those, then I sometimes think that you eliminate yourself out of contention as well. And I've even seen sometimes when you eliminate yourself out of contention, folks after the fact will tell you that, if you had just asked them, they might have even gone on the date or the coffee date or whatever else with them. But I do know that oftentimes happens because if you don't have like the Mercedes Benz, or if you're not the doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, and things of that nature, then sometimes you won't even approach people because you have this attitude that you're not good enough. And I've been guilty of it. I know others that have been guilty of it as well. So I was just wondering, what is some of your research found out about that as well?
Yeah, I think that is actually more of what I'm talking about. It's describing how successful media is in inviting people to not see their core value and what they have to bring other people, what they have to bring the world, right? Because we get inundated with this idea that you need to look a particular way, have particular things, whatever, and that is what makes you valuable. And that is not true. Humans, from the beginning of time, have been radically valuable from the get-go, from the time they're born, radically valuable and radically imperfect. That's the definition of being human, right? And there's nothing wrong with being radically imperfect. We are all on a journey. We're all learning. We're all hopefully growing. But there's no such thing as being perfect and a human. You can't be both, right? So you are radically valuable exactly as you are, whether you're 1 year old or 5 years old or 15 years old or 65 years old. You are radically valuable and you have something to bring yourself and the world. But it's not the message we hear over and over and over again, day after day after day. So it takes a lot of inner strength and hopefully good friends that mirror back to you your value. And really, ideally, that's what parents want to do and need to do with their own children, is to mirror back to them their value. You are radically valuable and you're learning. Right? But that requires a couple things of our parents that we, again, don't provide as a culture. Many other cultures do, but we do not. We don't provide basic child development information as people are growing so that they know what's typical for a 2-year-old, what's typical for a 3-year-old, what's typical for a 5-year-old, so that when they do the things they do, what I call with my kids, I say, you're fulfilling your job description. You're being exactly as you're supposed to be. And my job is to help shape that as you grow, right? But when I, as a parent, understand what's typical for different ages, then I'm much less likely to get frustrated with them when they're doing exactly what their brains and bodies are trying to learn to do, right? And so I'm able to access a little bit more patience inside myself when I'm like, of course you're wanting to throw yourself on the floor and have a temper tantrum because this feels really hard for you. And we're going to find a way to move through this. But I'm not going to lose my you-know-what all over them as if they're a 30-year-old throwing themselves on the floor in the grocery store, right? So if we actually helped our parents learn more child development information. How do they develop behaviorally each year? How do they develop emotionally each year? And how do they develop sexually and relationally each year? Like finding their genitals when their diapers come off. That's actually going to happen. And you need to be prepared for it so that you don't react, flip out. And then the child begins to make a meaning inside themselves that something must be profoundly wrong with me, because I don't know why I just got in so much trouble because I was just being me, which is what shame is. Shame is when a kid gets in trouble over and over for something they don't understand. And the only meaning they can make is something must be wrong with me, And so not giving our parents child development information, I think, is a really, really critical thing. And then also parents, because they were likely not raised with someone who understood, they have to do some work to heal the shame inside of them and the trauma often inside of them because, they may have gotten spanked really hard when they came home from swimming at age 7 and said, I was underwater for a whole hour, which is 7-year-olds or 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, when their imaginations are off the world, off the chart, but their sense of reality is still forming, they're going to do that kind of stuff. And I can remember as a child, my parents didn't understand. And I can remember like getting my mouth washed out with soap and thinking, I don't know what I'm getting in trouble for, but it was a punishment time. It was a time when you punished and when you were like really over your kids this way. And we have really lost in the United States how to understand children's development, how to raise them with calm and patience so that we're teaching them how to calm themselves and be able to manage their own emotions. Our emotions are usually way up here and the kids are way up here,
But isn't part of the problem? Because I remember when I dated a young lady that had 2 kids, and one of the kids was grade school. The other, well, actually, they were both grade school at the time, but one was, I think, in high school, and the other was more elementary school.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me that at that particular time, and they're both grown now, because I think the one that was in high school is like probably mid-20s or something like that. So I'm thinking the younger one might be in their early 20s now, or at least in the college ages and all of that. But it definitely seemed to me that a lot of times we allow other things to do the babysitting. Because I do remember there was a time that, you would be involved with the kids. If you weren't involved, your friends were involved with the kids and helping out with the kids. Your cousins and uncles and others might be helping out in the kid raising. But I do remember that in this particular case, the the TV, getting put in your room with some form of punishment. But if all the amenities are in the room, I don't know how much punishment that really is, and all along those lines. And it does seem to me that a lot of cases, that's just one case, but it does seem to be a lot of cases where people are like, they're punishing them by sending them to their room, but if the room has got, video games and TV and all of the other amenities, they're not going outside to play, which is something that they enjoy doing, but they've got a lot of distractions that are in the room. So I don't know how much punishment that truly is.
Well, I can completely understand that thinking, and really core to the human experience and the human desire is that for togetherness.
Mm-hmm.
And so back in the day, we had grandmas and grandpas and aunties and uncles all around, cousins all around. And so kids might be frustrating this person, but then they'd be like, go see your nana, or go, whatever, go play. And so our way of separating ourselves was not about stopping the togetherness. It was shifting the togetherness. And we had more of a sense of, we're kind of all raising these kids together, right? Now you make a really good point that we'll be like, go to your room. And so they're separated, and that place in them that wants to feel like they belong now feels punished there.
Right.
So while they can distract themselves with things, they don't feel very good inside about being sent over there alone, right? And really what we want to cultivate is togetherness, encouragement, some kinds of autonomy in children to make decisions, and actually pretty minimal interference. So, we might say, well, that didn't go well. How do you think you might be able to do that differently? So we're doing some things that are cultivating, rather than where we've moved in our parenting is this kind of hovering, and we're in all of their stuff, or we're sending them away to their room. And the kids actually aren't thriving in that kind of parenting at all. They thrived in the way we did it before, when we lived multi-generationally. They did a lot better because, grandma might have more patience, or grandpa might have more patience, or take them fishing or whatever, when the mom's like, I've had it, but they continued to feel like they belonged. Somebody was still there teaching them. We did a much better job then than we do now.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. As you were saying that and making that statement, I was actually thinking about one of the last times that I was with the nephews, and actually will be probably catch up with them again, maybe even this weekend around Father's Day and everything, since I know that I'll probably catch up with my brother and we'll go see our dad. And then in the course of that, we'll probably, of course, the nephews will be there. But I know when we were at Mom's house not that long ago, we were playing a board game, because Mom, and that's kind of her upbringing, is board games, whether it's Scrabble or whether it's some of the newer games like Spinners and things of that nature. And believe it was the oldest one. I believe it was Julius. I don't think it was Langston, that learned a very valuable lesson in terms of communications and even in terms of winning. Because
Yes.
after they won the game, they won the, I think that might have been the first game that they won. And then we were trying to get them to play again. And they were like, no, I'm good. I won my one game. So I don't have to play again. I'm 1-0. So I'm 1-0. We might not be able to get them to play again for another week or two, or maybe even another couple of months, because they're 1-0 now. So
That's right. That's really cute. Yeah, so the shameless parenting book that I wrote was really trying to answer the question that I was hearing from parents. Some parents from religious backgrounds, conservative religious backgrounds, and they just didn't want to do to their children what was done to them. And some people who that wasn't the case, but they had this common theme, like, I don't really like the way I was raised around my body, sexuality, relationships. I don't really like that, but I don't want to pass that on to my children, but I don't know what to do. Like, so could you provide some resource for me that will say, here's what to expect from your child, birth to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, all the way up to 18. Here's what to expect behaviorally from them. Here's what they're trying to accomplish, sort of developmentally, emotionally. Here's what they're trying to accomplish. Here's what their body and sensual and sexual curiosities might be in this 2-year frame. This is how it might express itself. And then I go on to ask some questions like, how do you think that will be for you when your child does that, in order to help the parent or caregiver, aunt, uncle, whatever, tap into the shame that might be inside of them from when they were that age, because it sits inside. And sometimes when we ask ourselves, well, how will it be for me when my nephew, tells me this story, or I catch my nephew doing whatever, how will that be for me? If you feel reaction inside of you, that's just the shame from when you were growing up. And so then you can reflect on, well, how do I think I got that? How were my parents with me around that thing? And it gives you a chance to reflect. And then I offer, here's the top books right now for your kids at this age and for you at this age. And here's the top websites. And so if you spend, an hour on those 3 pages, you're going to, and then get some of those resources, you're going to be prepared and informed about your child at that age. And then you can move ahead to the next 2 years and the next 2 years as they're growing up. You only need to be a little bit ahead of your kids. You don't have to have it all figured out at all.
No, that makes a lot of sense. But I was wondering, and I don't know what your thoughts are, have we gotten away from some of the things that we used to do, even education-wise? Because I know growing up in the 70s and definitely going to college in the early 80s, I definitely remember hearing, and even watching and enjoying watching things like Zoom and Sesame Street. And I know that they're still out there, but I don't know how engaged our kids are, and those that might have grandkids are, with those spaces compared to our generations and all along those lines. And I was even thinking about, even in the school system, I know that there was a time, and I guess they still do it, where mostly it was young ladies, but there might be a guy that took the class as well that would take, quote unquote, parenting courses. It might be them holding the make-believe doll and things along those nature and all of that. But I don't know how active that is now. I mean, I think that there's probably a few schools that do it here and there, but I think that that's the rarity versus the norm, whereas home ec and some of these other kind of parenting classes were almost the norm about 20,
That's
30,
right.
40 years ago. And it seems like we moved away from that. At least that's my read. And we need to talk to some of my friends in the teaching space to confirm that. But it does seem like we've moved away from that, unfortunately. But I'd love to hear your take on, I correct in thinking that we have moved away from that direction.
Yeah, so I'm more your age, and we actually had access to more child development information in the general public, in the 70s, in the 60s, and the 70s. It was very, heteronormative and gender specific, but it was still available. There was something available. And then we started to really kind of almost bury our information. We stopped doing research in sexuality. That happened around 1980. We've done very little since that point. It's very difficult for people to get approval to do some of the research that we had Masters and Johnson and Kinsey were doing tons of research before that. It's really a struggle, and has been since 1980. The whole United States sociopolitical environment shifted to the right pretty dramatically beginning in 1980, and it has stayed on that trajectory. And so what's underneath that is this push for capitalism, right? And so we've moved to a place where we value product more than people.
Right.
And we push kids to know what their careers are going to be early on. And we have really stopped the interpersonal wisdom that we had for so many years in our families and in our environment. And now we are more individualist, more living all alone, dismembered from our previous family, from our extended family in many cases. And we've only been giving information about products, corporations, how you get successful.
But ironically, hasn't that led to a problem as well? Because I agree with everything that you just said, because we have moved to a business mindset and all of that, meaning that it's all about the product and the mindset. But whenever I talk to entrepreneurs or even people that are in the business world, including people that own major companies and even hedge fund kind of people and things of that nature, one of the biggest problems that they have is, and it also happens in relationships, and most relationship coaches talk about this, is the inability to communicate, whether it's communicating with our employees or communicating with our family or communicating with our significant other or communicating with our kids. So it sounds like that has become the biggest issue, is that what we have moved away from is what is most needed, and that is what most people complain about, because most people complain that what they are suffering from or what they have a hard time dealing with is the communications. Even in my own relationships, I know that oftentimes comes up in the course of the conversation, is you're not communicating with me enough, or I need to hear more from you, and things along those lines, or I need to talk to you on a daily basis, which I don't know if we always agree with and everything. I think that sometimes that can be a little bit too much, but I also understand that some folks want daily contact.
Yeah, no, it's that interpersonal wisdom. If we're not, you have to raise a child to have those skills. And if we aren't understanding children and we don't understand those skills even for ourselves, how are we raising that in our children? We're not. And so what we have moved away from, we knew a lot of that for a long, long time. And many ancient cultures are still parenting in those ways. But instead, we start pushing our children to accomplish 3, 4, 5, accomplish. But we're not developing those really strong interpersonal skills in ourselves or in our children. And so you end up being handicapped emotionally and relationally as an adult. And you find people bringing this into their workplace where they can't collaborate well, and yet they need to, because multiple disciplines are needed for this particular project to be successful. And they are struggling with how to communicate, really well. And then they bring that home, right? They don't know how to communicate. They're not even clear about what they need. They're filled with lots of shame and doubt that they have never really dealt with. And so we just see a lot of these kinds of messes happening across our culture, because I really think we have swung away from the interpersonal and the importance of the interpersonal in our lives.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. But the other thing I was curious about is that while we're swinging away from that, there seems to be this underbelly of society that is greater than people actually think it is, but it seems to be very much prominent. Because while there is a lot of lack of communication around sexuality, I am oftentimes amazed when I go into social media spaces and even some non-social media spaces when I run across people that are part of the, for lack of a better term, the swinging and some of the other alt communities that exist out there and everything. So am I wrong in thinking that this is a larger population than we actually think it is, because sometimes I'm just amazed at the amount of numbers that exist in some of these communities. I'm going like, wait a minute, there's that many people that are literally, having multiple partners or wife swapping or doing a number of the other things that you hear about in those all communities, including some that I still don't understand why people want to go around in rabbit suits and all of that. But apparently the furries are very big and everything. And I remember there was a whole TV episode in one of those crime shows
Right,
about
right,
one of
right.
those things going on. But like I said, I don't get it. But then again, maybe if I got dressed as a rabbit, I might understand it. But
You
as
know,
of now, I don't understand it.
yeah, no, I totally understand. There has always been a much greater diversity in sexual expression than what we show in front of people. And I think it begs the question, what causes harm to people and what does not cause harm to people, right?
Exactly.
And so we know things like secrets in relationship can be harmful.
Mhm.
We know that power over in
Mhm.
relationships can be harmful,
Mhm.
right? Where people are forced to do things that they don't agree to, right?
Right.
There's not consent. Those things are harmful. When you have uh, power differences like in age,
Mhm.
where somebody doesn't really feel the freedom to say no or that they don't understand, right? Those are harmful. But there's a whole lot of things that people often don't hear about that are happening with a lot of consent and choice. So people are having fun. It's kind of like playing dress up when you're 3. You know, they're choosing how to play together. They're talking about it ahead of time. They're saying, do you want to do this? And the other one's like, yeah, that sounds fun, but I don't want to do this. And like, okay, that's on your no list. And they're making up decisions before they actually ever even do anything. And so then when they do whatever it is they're going to do, people don't get hurt. People are having fun. People have a good time. And this is the same both in like the kink community where there might be bondage and discipline, or there might be whatever there. But it's also true, or furries or whatever, but it's also true in places where people have open marriages. So
Mhm.
rather than somebody going and having an affair that no one knows about, only to find out later and then be devastated, they actually talk ahead of time and say, you know, I love our relationship. I love you. And we got married at 20 or 21. And I now realize all these other things about me. And I'm wondering if, and maybe you are too, and I'm wondering if we can talk about if there are ways to bring some of those things into our lives that still keep our relationship in a good place. And so people are making all kinds of decisions, but the important thing to know is they're talking about it, they're agreeing to it, and it often works fine. Not always, but then welcome to relationships, not always. But the honesty is very different. We've been having affairs as long as we've been having marriages.
Mhm.
And because people are talking now more about in the public, more about open relationships, they've always gone on, but they've
Right.
been kind of in the secret, right? People are saying, I think I would rather have integrity than do something that would be hurtful to me or you or our relationship. And so there's a lot of people that never would have had those conversations that are having them now.
No, I definitely agree, because I actually have a friend that is involved in one of those relationships. I think he's got, and technically, I guess it's still against the law, but then again, so are certain other things that a lot of people enjoy in their relationships that are
Yeah.
against the law and everything. But
Yeah.
if that's happening in the bedroom, then that's happening in the bedroom. Because I think, technically speaking, there are still several states around where oral relationships are
That's right.
technically still against the law and everything, even though even in those states and even amongst some of those Congress people, they're
Yes.
probably enjoyed those situations and all
Yes.
of that. But definitely, I have a friend that is, I think, last time I checked, I think he might even be working on wife number 3, but I know he's got definitely wife number 2 and everything. And one of them is the mother of his child, because I think he only has one child from what I recall, and the other woman, I don't even think wanted children, but they are raising them together and all
Yes.
along those
Yes.
lines. But if they're not getting prosecuted, I think there's pretty much public knowledge that relationship is going on. Then I think that it's pretty much their business, and I think that that's the attitude that a lot of
Yeah.
people have, even when it comes to certain things that might be against the law that the church might not be fans of and all of that. But I think more
Yeah.
and more people are just having that kind of attitude. But one of the things I was curious about, I'd love to hear your thought about it, because you've done research and you've been working with college kids and done it for decades now and everything, is I'm of the opinion, because you mentioned the age range and everything, I'm of the opinion that our younger people are a little bit more open than our generation was and all of that, because I'm seeing that a lot of the younger people are looking at age differences and could care less, definitely looking at race differences and could care less, and in some cases they're even looking at orientations and trans relationships and could care less, where some of our folks are like getting hung up on some of these things that exist in society. But maybe it's just me being overly optimistic. I do have those soon to be 2008, 2009, so soon to be 13 and 14, because their birthday will be in August. I mentioned my birthday in July. Theirs, both of them were August babies, so they'll be 13 and 14. And maybe it's just that as they hit more and more of those teen years, I'm wishing that for them as they go into adulthood and all along those lines. But am I being naive into thinking that they are a little bit more open to differences, including age ranges and including even like styles of in terms of gender orientation and things of that nature, and even in terms of race, because it doesn't even seem like they could care less about that.
That's right. Yeah, no, that was another reason why I wrote the Shameless Parenting book, because we have kids coming up right now. First time ever we've ever seen this ever in our culture, where the kids are learning so much from each other about all kinds of diversities, diversities of gender, how you feel inside your body. Does what you were born with match how you feel on the inside, and or orientation, who they're attracted to, there are all kinds of new words that the kids have that we never had. There are pronoun words, there are words like transgender, there are words like pansexual, there are words like non-binary. These are brand new words culturally, really, as far as them being out in front of the kids. So the kids are talking about this stuff in school from second grade forward. They're learning, they're listening to each other, and they're like, oh, you're that way, well, that's fine, you're still my friend. Oh, you're that way, oh, that's fine, you're still my friend, because they're growing up with it. And it's kind of like, that's an orange flower, that's a red flower, that's fine, that's part of our world. So they are very accepting of each other in that space. They come home, and I know I was talking to one of my supervisees the other day, and she had a mom who came in to do therapy with her, who said, my 10-year-old came home last week and said, I think I'm non-binary and pansexual. And the mom immediately thought, did I do something wrong? So she felt shame. And then she's like, and I have no idea what these things mean. But she didn't want to shame her child. So she took it to therapy and said, can you help me understand this? Because I just want to be supportive of my child. I want to be present for them, Understanding that 10-year-olds are shifting up a lot, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, you're in pre-adolescence and adolescence, and there's going to be all kinds of changes that go on in your life. So some things that you thought at 10, 11, 12 may stick all the way through your life, and some of them may not, because you're growing and developing. But we've got this huge gap between what our kids are experiencing with each other and what they come home and tell their parents, who got silence and shaming, right? And so they are like, I don't know what to do with this. Really, if I could give any advice, it's just listen. And if you don't understand something, to say, I don't really know what those words mean. I love you, and I'm always going to want to know who you're becoming. So can you explain that to me? And if you're just non-reactive and open and loving, your child is going to bring you along with them. And this is really what parents want. Parents want to be a resource for their child all the way through adolescence. But if they're reactive, the child is going to go underground. The child is not going to turn to them. They're going to turn to their friends. Right. And so teaching parents what's typical and how to be non-reactive is really about helping the parents stay connected to the child, and the child wanting to stay connected to the parent through their adolescence, which is ultimately going to be safer, hopefully, than if they're just relying on media and their friends.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But what do you say to those people? Because we've even got some on this network, unfortunately, that don't understand those terms when they pop up, like trans and pan,
Right.
and they feel that it's just too much of that quote, and their words, not mine, woke community and all of that,
Right.
and that they don't understand this,
Yeah.
and that it's beyond their comprehension. And some of these are young people, because I know that one of the gentlemen is actually from Australia, and I want to say that he's in his 30s, if not maybe even be
Yeah.
pushing around the 20s and everything. So he's
Yeah.
not necessarily in that 50 or 60 age range. He definitely
Sure.
would be part
Right.
of the young crowd and everything. But there is a feeling that maybe we're teaching too much of that in the school system and all of that. I don't know that you can teach too much, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. There's a very, very old idea that has always been wrong. And that is, if you teach it, they'll become it.
Right.
Or they'll do it.
Right.
That has never been true. People have a drive in them to be authentically who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Now, during adolescence, they're going to try a lot of things on, because that's how you learn and grow. But by the time you're in your 20s, late 20s, early 30s, you're starting to figure out exactly who you are if you haven't before that. And you want to be that in the world in an honest way. You want to be seen for that. You want to be known for that, loved for that, accepted for that. Just because we did not help people understand transgender or sexual orientations for years and years and years doesn't mean those things haven't always been there.
Right.
They have always been there. In fact, was recently a documentary that I watched on an intersex person, so somebody whose genitals either externally or internally are not exactly masculine or feminine.
Mm-hmm.
And in that documentary, they were interviewing a rabbi who spoke of different passages in the Torah that recognized people who were what we would call transgender.
Right.
Then they might have called them eunuchs, they might have called them something else, but they didn't feel on the inside what their bodies matched.
Right.
And they were often thought of as more spiritual people. And this is true in the Native First Nations tribes, that they're thought of as two-spirit people, more spiritual, actually. And so I'll often recommend to people who don't understand transgender to watch a documentary that's going to teach them what they just don't know. And so there's a really good one called Trans that you can get, I think, on probably Amazon or Prime or one of them. And it walks through 3 different families. All of them had children that were transgender, that came out as transgender at some point in their life. The one family that refused to believe their child, that child committed suicide.
Well,
and we know that there's a 42% chance that a child will attempt suicide if they are transgender and their parents and loved ones don't believe them. It's incredibly high. And so people don't become that distraught and want to leave the planet if they're not in severe pain. So just because we don't understand transgender does not mean it is not a very real thing, and that people's drive to live authentically and be seen and loved for who they are is so strong in humans that they'll actually want to kill themselves if the people that they love the most can't hear them, can't see them, can't be curious about them. And I don't know a single parent, grandparent, anybody who would ever want that for their child, but they struggle with things like transgender or gender or sexual orientations. They struggle with that. And so they cling to their old ideas, not realizing the pain and damage that they're causing their loved one. And if they don't kill themselves, they'll cut off from them and go create their own family of people who can love them. And that is also very painful for families, right? And so it behooves us, if you happen to be straight, you happen to be in the dominant of whatever's typical, that you take the time to understand people whose experiences are different from you if you want to stay connected to them, because there are many people whose experiences, whether it's orientation, gender, race, whatever, are very different than yours. And it behooves you to take the time to listen and be curious and understand in order to have a better functioning human family,
Yeah, that
because
makes
we are this diverse.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And unfortunately, that's where people, I think, even don't pay attention to why people join gangs and things of that nature. Because a lot of times that's that fact that they don't have that support system in their own family. So then they will go and try to find something that gives them that support system. And sometimes that can be that gang mentality and all along those lines. So, like I said, my brother has actually worked with different organizations that have been in that space of doing intervention and trying to get kids out of that kind of a lifestyle and much needed
Right.
work and all of that, because definitely, unfortunately, as he's told me, sometimes those people, that's all they're looking for is just somebody that they can identify with and that they can relate to. If they're not getting it at home, then they're going to find it from another
That's
source, and
right.
it might be that gang environment.
That's right. Yeah, that goes back to what I was talking about: togetherness, encouragement, autonomy, being able to make some of your own decisions, and then not having so much intervention. When we can't do togetherness with our children, when we send them off for whatever reason,
Right.
and we can't give them encouragement, their hearts are gonna go seek it.
Hmm.
It is in who we are as humans. We are meant for connection, and we're meant for shared pleasure, shared identity with people. We want to belong.
Yeah, we definitely want to belong on a regular basis and everything. How often, when you talk to your students and even some of the other folks that you've done the research with, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, do you find people that are settling? Because I also find that we do a lot of that in society as well, that we may have a certain standard that we want, whether that is a certain type of individual and a certain type of person that we want to be our partners and all of that, but because of whatever reasons we're not getting that, and it may even be kind of like I alluded to before, that you might want a certain intellect, or you might want a certain type of a person to be that the whatever your standard of beauty is and everything. But if you don't get it, then you start settling for things that you are not actually wanting and all of that. So I just wondering, is that something that you have found also goes on, is that at some point, because of the need to have touch and communication and relationships in general, that you might find yourself settling? And I just wondered, is that something that you've dealt with as well in your
Yeah.
research?
I think that that's a great question, and it's a complex question. There's a type of settling that people do because they don't value themselves enough,
Right.
right? And so they settle for something because they don't believe they deserve better. They don't
Right.
believe they deserve to be treated better. They don't deserve that. They think they need to be loved better, and that really comes from a lack of self-esteem, a lack of believing your value and your worth. And so in those kinds of cases, I'm really encouraging people to do whatever healing they need to do so that they see how radically valuable they are, and radically imperfect, but that's fine. That you are still radically valuable and you deserve to be seen, known, loved, and accepted. But you may have to do some therapy work or some kind of work to heal your insides, and to see how valuable you are, or to heal the trauma maybe that you went through when you were younger. There's another side to that question, that is people who are unrealistic around what goes into a long-term relationship. So you may find your person, you may expect everything to be so perfect, whatever that means, that you never allow yourself to get close to anybody,
Right.
or you never do the work that relationship is going to invite you into. Your children are going to invite you to grow all the time. If you have a long-term partner, they're going to invite you to grow too. They're going to say things like, my husband would be like, you are stubborn. And I'm like, I know I'm stubborn. I need to work on that, right?
Mhm.
Your partners are going to invite those things out in you. That isn't about the relationship not being right for you. It just might be about the relationship doing what relationships do, which is invite each other to grow. And when that happens, it's not fun. It's painful. We don't like it, but it's good for us, right? And when we do the work, it builds a tighter intimacy between us and our other person, because we've both been working hard to make ourselves better and to make this relationship better. That kind of honesty builds more intimacy in a relationship. And so I see that question really falling kind of in two places.
No, that makes sense. But along those same lines, I was wondering, um, when relationships are going on, whether it's in well, definitely when it's in that dating space, but I would even argue in the marriage space as well. Do you think that we give each other enough time to breathe? Because I do sometimes feel that we try to go from one relationship to the other without even letting the other relationship in uh with breathing space. Because I do think that there is a human habit that is like, that relationship didn't work, so I'm ready to dive in to the next one. And it seems to me that you do need to have some breathing space. And I know that, like I said, I'll even admit to my own guilt, as I've done on a couple of these questions, was I know there have been times that literally one relationship ended and I was in the next one maybe in a day and a half to 2 days. And in hindsight, I'm like, there was no breathing space. And that's probably why the second one didn't work either, because there was
Right.
no breathing space and all of that.
Right. I think you bring up a brilliant point. Relationships in part are they're to bring us joy and pleasure and all kinds of things, but they're also there to teach us something.
Mhm.
And if a relationship doesn't work, it's really good for us to sit back and go, what part of that was my responsibility
Right.
and what part of that wasn't? I can't do anything about that part that wasn't my responsibility. But if I take the time to learn about the part that was, I'll be better the next time I go out. But you have to give yourself that time. You also often have to heal your heart because you did some attachment to somebody and now you broke that attachment, right? And so your heart might be hurting. And you don't want to jump into a relationship just because you need someone to soothe you,
Right.
right? You want to be able to fully heal and learn because you're going to make a better choice next time if you give yourself that space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Something I noticed in the pandemic, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, and I've been guilty of this one as well, but I think it became even more prevalent during the pandemic, partially because we were all stuck at home and everything.
Yeah.
But what is the appeal of long distance relationships? Because, like I said, I've been involved in a couple. I know that sometimes it is that space, which is a good thing because sometimes you like to be away from the person. It's not that you're trying to do anything bad or against them and everything, but you just like to have that space, which a lot of times we all enjoy. Even sometimes I know married people that have their own man and women rooms because they want that space. So I think that that's part of the appeal of long distance relationships. But I did notice that it seemed to be quite a bit of that was going on during the pandemic, and part of that was people going into apps like Clubhouse and different other apps and discovering
Sure.
people that were in Timbuktu, and they were finding that they had some chemistry going on. And now, in some cases, they might even be talking about moving in with those people. Now, whether that actually happens, that will depend on the economies of those folks that are involved and all of that. So it might just be a fantasy, but some of those fantasies may turn into reality for all I know, and all of that.
Right.
But what is your take on the appeal of long distance relationships?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think the pandemic certainly fostered that because people were alone, but they still that desire to connect, right?
Mhm.
Connection and pleasure drives us. And so people would find ways to, and now being far away didn't seem like it was such a big deal because we really, to be together was risky,
Right.
right? So, but I do think you bring up a really good point, and that is that um, some types of relationship forms lend itself to autonomy
Mhm.
more than others. And I think it's really important to know what amount of autonomy you like in your relationship. Are
Yeah.
you an introvert? Are you really independent? You might want more autonomy than somebody who's an extrovert who's dependent,
Mhm.
right? And that is not going to be a good fit no matter how you go.
Yeah.
And so if you want to inhabit the same house, you need to match each other, I think, where your autonomy and independence lie, so that people aren't getting their feelings hurt when somebody's like, I think I'm going to go travel for a month. I hope that's okay with you. If they're both that way, the person's going to be like, that's fine. I think I'll go fishing, or whatever the deal is. But if that is not fine, it's a constant fight because somebody's taking personally your autonomy.
Yeah, and it seems to me that we even have seen that in some famous cases and everything. Because I think personally that that's what was going on, and it's just my take. And I didn't watch all of the trial; I only saw bits and pieces of it. But I think that there wasn't enough communication going on between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard in terms of what they liked and all of that. Because it seemed to me that he had some masochistic kind of things going on that Amber might not have known about, and Amber might have had some personality things going on that he wasn't aware of as well. At least that's what I was picking up from the trials. I was going like, it seems to me that they should have, they were together for a minute. It seems that they should have known each other better, but then we find out all of this during the trial and all of this, because I'm going like, wait a minute, if he was cutting himself, and you've known that when you got into the relationship. But so I guess there are certain things that people hide until they feel comfortable with being in those situations.
That's right. And there's also a part of sometimes people will see a red flag and they'll ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
Or they'll think, oh, I could change that person.
Right.
And no, actually, it's really good to take the time and notice those red flags and just let them be, like, don't pursue that relationship, because if it's a red flag that comes up in the first month, it's usually a bigger one.
Yeah. But I'm glad you brought that up, because red flags, and I've had this conversation with family members as well as just other guests and just friends in general. Why is it that we as a people will oftentimes see those red flags and even be aware of the red flags, and we don't want to, and we come back to that communication thing, because there was a time that we as a neighbors would always be looking out for our neighbors, and that might just be a Southern thing, but we would be looking out for our neighbors and all of that. But now we can even see a red flag and all of that, and not even pull the person's, there's an old expression, pull a person's coattail. Because there were a couple of times that folks have told me after the fact that, let's just say that the person was, had what we would consider crazy or bipolar issues. And they'd be like, no, that person wasn't for you. And I knew that when the time that you were dating them. And in the back of my mind, I'm going like, well, I wish you had told me that so that you could have saved me like about a year or two or months or whatever, how much time it was of the stress that I went through thinking it was going one direction, and you could have just pulled me to the coattail. And their answer makes sense, because in hindsight, they were probably right, because their answer is like, we didn't tell you because we knew you wouldn't listen. So, because a lot of times we get caught up in the magic of the romance and all of that. So even we see the red flags, for the same reason we ignore the red flags, we would probably ignore the advice, even if it was given to us. But I do wish that our friends would sometimes tell us if they see those red flags, and then we can make the judgment to either listen or not listen.
Right. No, you're right. And, it takes a lot of emotional maturity or emotional intelligence to do dating and relationships well.
Mm-hmm.
Where we're willing to hear hard things from our friends, where we're willing to sit back and say, okay, I got all these, dopamine running, I got all these feelings happening, but can I put myself over here and think about things realistically? Because these feelings are going to last for a couple of years and that's it. They say developmentally or evolutionarily that all of those limerick feelings that we have at the beginning actually were there for bonding, getting pregnant, and getting a child to age 2. And then they start to fade. And the way that we cultivate them is through loving touch and other things that we put in our relationship. But that sort of initial burst is really fairly short-lived. And so we've got to be able to sit back and think, realistically, is this a good fit for me? Mm-hmm. And are there red flags that I need to pay attention to that I know if that became an issue would be a deal breaker for me? So it takes some really realistic thinking and some emotional intelligence when we're dating, to not let our feelings run ahead of us and then end up in situations where like, oh, that wasn't any fun, you know?
But some of the red flags, and coming back to our original part of the initial part of this conversation, are red flags that you're aware of, but you don't want to rule out the relationship based on those red flags, and everything. Because we do know that we are conditioned by our families and our churches and the things of that nature. So I do know that there are some red flags even around sexuality that you might pick up on and everything, but at the same time, uh, in one hand, you feeling like you might be, I won't say changing the person, but at least enhancing the person and giving them a different view of life and everything. But on the other hand, you do know that if you're quote unquote dating a church girl, that she might be trying to push you quote closer to marriage than you might want to do it initially, and all of that, just because that's the nature of the way that a lot of our, particularly Christian conservative churches are, and all of that. But
Yes.
as I was saying that, I was just thinking to myself, I was knowing that unfortunately, because of that, sometimes people are put in positions of not discovering themselves as much as you would like them to discover themselves. Because I can think of, and without naming names, because I wouldn't name names anyway, because the gentleman doesn't do that. But there were at least two cases that I know of where we started having some more experimentation, and they were like, "Whoa, this is a whole different part of sexuality that I didn't even know about." And these were not young women; these were women that
Yeah,
were
right.
later in age and everything, and they're going like, wait a minute, you mean that I can actually have that kind of pleasure without the standard
Yes,
style? And I'll just leave it
right.
at that and everything. But they were, it awakened their sexuality. Now, we didn't stay a couple, so whether they stayed awakened or whether they even became more awakened, that I don't know, even though some of them I stayed friends with, even though their relationship didn't work out.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think um what I what you bring up has, like, if you notice something and you're like, I'm not sure if that's a red flag or not,
Right.
ask yourself, can you talk about that?
Right.
Is it a subject you can talk about together?
Mhm.
Right? Because if you are able to talk about it, then you can assess, is this person in a place where they want to learn, or where we could learn together, or where they can handle talking about something hard like this? Because that tells you a lot about other parts of a person,
Right.
And you may find out this is a learning curve that they're totally willing to be on, or it's a learning curve you're willing to be on, versus it being something that is like, would be a trait or something that could break the relationship. Right. So, I mean, sexuality is a perfect place to talk about that. Is that something that we can talk about? Are you up for exploring, or, that kind of thing, versus finding out that the person is shut down
Right.
and wants nothing to do with it? Well, that might be a break for the relationship, right? That might be this isn't going to work, but entering into the conversation is going to tell you a lot about that, how amenable the relationship and they are and you are to discovering things together.
Yeah, and that's an important thing, because I think a lot of times we don't even have those conversations, and a lot of times we don't even bring it up and things along those lines. And sometimes it doesn't even become a conversation until much later in the life. Because I know some people that didn't really discover their, and I agree with what you said, that we discover our sexuality to some degree at our young age, but didn't really fully explore their full sexuality until well into their adult years and things along that line, because they were afraid of the consequences of
That's
learning
right.
about sexuality, and afraid of what the public's reaction would be to whatever they were involved in, and things in that space.
Right.
What
Exactly. Yep.
yeah, coming,
Exactly.
and I'm getting ready to wind down shortly and everything, but going back to parenting, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I have to
Me
get in
too.
touch with your assistant and see if we can have you come back on another show very
Sure.
near future and all of that. But what do you say to parents that are going through difficult times with their kids? I kind of alluded to one friend, but I've had a couple of friends that have had that experience and everything. But what do you say to the folks that are going through hard times with their kids, and maybe the kids are even wanting to distance themselves from their parents because of
Right.
whatever conflicts might have been going on, whether that was in their individual relationship with their parent or whether it was the parents having fights and disputes among themselves that led to the split with the kids and all of that. But I was just wondering what you say to that. And as part of that, but also would like to know your thoughts about it. Should we train our kids at an early age to think about not just sexuality, but life in general? I know that when my nephews were born, my dad literally, and I won't say they might have been babies, they might have been crawling for all I know, and I can recall like 6 months, but he was literally showing them, that's a grass, that's a frog, that's a butterfly, and we're showing them things like that. And that's one of the reasons that I think that they are as well developed as they are, because their granddad, my dad, was showing them that, but also they were getting that supported by both of their parents, both my brother as well as my brother's now ex-wife and everything. But I definitely think that that is something that we need to have more of, that I don't see enough of with our kids. But I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think, again, this kind of gets back to child development. If you understand what your children are trying emotionally, behaviorally, relationally to accomplish developmentally at those different ages, you're much more likely to come alongside. So when they're young, they're wanting to discover their world. And so if you're there to help them name the world, then they're learning the language, they're learning what things are, they're learning what things mean, and they're feeling connected to you. These are all really good things. But again, it kind of is predicated on you knowing what are they trying to do at each age, and then how can you facilitate that growth and development as well as their relationship with you. And so this is where I think, writing that book was, for me, going to be really helpful to other people, because it's hard for us to get that information right now. There are some really good parenting books that harken back to the way that we used to parent, back before we were so much about making money. And many of our ancient cultures continue to parent this way. There's one called Hunt, Gather, Parent. That's a fairly new book. And that book really studies what do we know helps kids grow strong, and has been used for thousands of years in other cultures and was used for a long time in ours, but we've really moved away from it in the last several generations. I think if you are, to get to your first question, having a struggle with your kids, and this is common that you're going to have a different time here and there where you might have a struggle with your kids, get the support that you need as a parent, whether that's from a therapist or a pastor or your auntie who's already raised 6 kids or whatever, but get somebody who can listen to you and give you ideas of how to maybe connect in a different way with your child, how to maybe repair past arguments that you had with them, or help you listen to them differently, or whatever, because fundamentally we want to be connected to our parents. We want to feel like they get us, they understand us. But as we're growing, we don't have the maturity. And if our parent is getting stuck on something, then we're just going to be stuck. Right. And so we often need someone else to come in from the side and say, well, let me help. Let's try to understand this together. And maybe we can come with some ideas that will help you build a bridge back to each other again. And it just helps to have another voice, someone that you trust, who maybe's got more experience and they're not so close to it. Because we get really close to our kids. I have 4 and 2 grandchildren, and I know how emotional it can be in raising your children when things aren't going well. And sometimes you just need that outside person you trust to help you take a deep breath and know some other ideas of things to do.
That makes a lot of sense and everything. And I wish more of that would be going on. How can folks find out about your books and reach you and everything? And one of the things that I get all of my guests, and like I said, I definitely do want to get you back on and everything. But this is a global Network, international broadcast media, Pod TV on your Roku channels, and everything along those lines. So that being said, I oftentimes try to get people to give encouraging words, and we do know that we need encouraging words in this day and time. So if you can let folks know how they can reach you and get these amazing books, like I said, when I was reading about this whole notion, and I am definitely one that believes that the churches really need to change their viewpoints about sexuality and some of the things that they're teaching, and definitely have to get you back so we can explore that even more as well and all along those lines. But if you can just give some words of encouragement and how folks can learn about these two amazing books that we have talked about.
Thank you for asking. So I have a couple of websites. So one of them is Dr. Tina Shameless, so DrTina Shameless, SHAMELESS. That particular website will tell you things that will give you webinars you can watch, will give you information about the two books, Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, and Shameless Parenting. And it has what I call cheat sheets for professionals to download. So things for clergy, things for educators, things for therapists and coaches and doctors, so that they can give handouts to the parents that they're working with that says, here's something for your 2-year-old, or here's something for your 4-year-old, or here's something if you've got adolescents, and has on a front back sheet that you can download. You can download a license and then run them off, make posters with them, do whatever you want. Those cheat sheets, I'll tell you about those on that website too. I have a website that's also just my full name, TinaShermerSellers.com, as you see on the sign there.
Right.
And that will give you free resources and a bunch of other information too. And then I have a website that is NWIOI.com, and that's the Northwest Institute on Intimacy. And it's an institute that I run that trains physicians and parents and educators and clergy and therapists, whatever, on sexual health, the stuff we didn't get growing up. And it has a ton of online classes and it has some live classes. And it's really to just raise the bar on our education and awareness of what's normal and typical. So I think, and then I'm on Instagram at Dr. Tina Shameless, and you can find me there. And I have, again, a bunch of free stuff for people there. But as far as encouragement, I want to tell people to take a deep breath first and foremost, and to know that you're probably doing the very best you can with what you were given, both from your families of origin and from your culture. And that it's hard work to be a parent, be an aunt, be an uncle in the midst of all the pressures that are on people right now. So first, just take a deep breath, pat yourself on the back, let yourself know that you're doing a good job, and get some of these resources, especially the Shameless Parenting book if you've got kids in your life, or if you feel like the church really made it difficult for you, read the other book. They're both on Audible too, so you can listen to them. But just bring around you things that will encourage you and make it a little easier for you, because we just don't do a very good job in our culture supporting our parents and supporting our people. And so we often just need more resources, and they're there, but sometimes we just need somebody to point us in that direction and say, like with the Shameless book, at the end of every section, I'm like, here's the top books. You don't need to go look. Here's the top books for you, for your kiddo. Here's the top websites. All that stuff will put things right at your fingertips. You'll not feel so alone. And that's what I want for people, is just don't feel so alone, feel encouraged, and have some things at your fingertips that just make it a little bit easier for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of feeling alone and everything, as you were saying it, I was just thinking to myself and everything, and that was the last question. I lied. I had one more at all of that, because one of the things that was crossing my mind was that too often people will, how can I put it, overexpose themselves and overexpose what they are going through. And I'd love to know your thoughts about this, because I do know that sometimes, even in relationships, people will bring their job concerns into the relationships, and sometimes it can overburden the relationship if you're sharing all of what's going on in your job with your partner. So I was just wondering your take on that, because I do know that a lot of times people will want to vent about what's going on. It might be about their job, about their family, or whatever. But at the same time, do you want to? I mean, you want to share, but there's such a thing as oversharing.
Right. Your point is so well taken, because again, I think this is a function of getting so isolated and individualized, focused, individual, in our culture, that we don't have our community around us, right? To like complain to the two girlfriends and the aunt and the uncle and the parent, and like where we can spread out our stuff a little bit and be more realistic as to what our partner can do and they can't do.
Right.
No one person is ever going to be enough for any of us. We need a village. We really do need a village, all of us. And when we are pushing people to move across, the United States to take another job over here and leave their communities everywhere, they're very isolated. And as they become more isolated, they put more pressure on the very few relationships that they have at their disposal. And it's really hard because people often can't handle that and what's happening in their own life and, other people. And so really, I think as a culture, we need to value community more. We need to support each other more. And we need to make it not so important that people get the next job, get the next raise, get the whatever, if it's going to cost them leaving their support system, right? Back when we didn't have a choice, we had the village around us. But we've been breaking the village apart now for several generations, and we're feeling the pain of it right now.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Well, Tina, this has been thoroughly enjoyable, and I must get you back on in the very near future. So I'm actually going to put on the plane that we use as our outro, just like the 30 seconds is our intro and everything. It's like a little 20-second. It also shows some of the founders of this particular network and all of that. But definitely, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Glad I was able to have those conversations with your assistant. But I'm hoping I can get you back on maybe even in July or August, because you just have a wealth of knowledge, and I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and look forward to learning more about what you are studying and what you are learning, because this has been one of my truly enjoyable interviews that I have thoroughly enjoyed and learned a lot from you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I loved being here with you. It was wonderful having this conversation with you today. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So we're going to get on out of here. And of course, we'll be back next week with more exciting guests. But definitely, this has been a thoroughly enjoyable conversation. And I'm looking forward to seeing Tina come back in the not too distant future. But right now, let's watch this plane and some of our founders as we get on out of here.
So